We are live.
Good evening, and welcome to a virtual meeting of the City of Dublin Planning and Zoning Commission. The Ohio Legislature passed several emergency laws to address the pandemic, including the ability for public entities to conduct full meetings. We appreciate this ability to maintain our continuity of government and will be holding our meetings online and live streaming on YouTube until further notice. You can access the city's live stream on the city's website. We welcome your comments on cases. In order to submit any questions or comments during the meeting, please use the form under the streaming video on the city's website. Your questions and comments will be relayed to the commission by the meeting moderator. Please provide a valid name and address when submitting your comments and refrain from making any inappropriate comments. We wish to accommodate public participation and comments to the greatest extent possible. We appreciate your patience. At this time, I'll call the meeting to order. Nikki, could you please present the American flag? And those of you in the meeting, if you wouldn't mind turning your video off, your audio on, and joining me in saying the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United
States of America,
and to the
republic
for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all. Thank you for that. Ms. Beal, would you please call roll this evening?
Yes. Mr. Schneer? Mr.
Yes.
Schneer? Okay.
Yes.
Ms. Kennedy?
Yes.
Mr. Fishman?
Here.
Ms. Fox?
Yes, here.
Ms. Call?
Here.
Mr. Supalak?
Here.
Mr. Grimes?
Here.
Thank you, Ms. Beal. Papers are stuck together. All right, we have documents this evening, and I am looking for a motion to accept the documents into record.
So move. Second.
Thank you. We do not have any meeting minutes eligible for tonight's approval. Just a call out there. Ms. Beal, would you please?
Yes. Mr. Supalak?
Yes.
Mr. Grimes?
Yes.
Ms. Call?
Yes.
Ms. Fox?
Yes.
Mr. Fishman?
Yes.
Ms. Kennedy?
Yes.
Mr. Schneer?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Beal. The Planning and Zoning Commission is an advisory board to City Council when rezoning and platting of property are under consideration. In such cases, City Council will receive recommendations from the Commission. In other cases, the Commission has the final decision-making responsibility. Anyone who intends to address the Commission on any of these administrative cases must be sworn in. The agenda order is typically determined at the beginning of the meeting by the chair. The rules and regulations of the Planning and Zoning Commission state that no new agenda items are to be introduced after 10:30 p.m. There are 3 cases eligible for the consent agenda this evening. Those cases are Case 1, 20-183 AFDP for Tim Hortons at 6850 Hospital Drive. Case 2, 20-182 AFDP for Tim Hortons at 7493 Sawmill Road. And Case 3, 21-002 AFDP for the Country Club at Muirfield. Does anyone from the Commission wish to pull any of these cases from the consent agenda? Seeing none.
I had one question about the Muirfield, the landscaping along Muirfield Drive. We had talked about that being opaque landscaping in front of the courts, and it said it was going to be worked out with staff. Is staff counting on doing that, making it opaque?
Yes, that is an item that we'll continue to work with them on as they finalize their landscape plan around the pickleball courts. But that certainly is a consideration moving forward.
Okay, I had mentioned, we don't want to see the pickleball from Muirfield Drive because it's right on Muirfield Drive. So I don't have any problem, just so you can guarantee that will be that way on when you work it out with the applicant.
Certainly.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And then staff, has any public comment been received on any of these 3 cases?
There's been no public comment on any of these cases.
Thank you. And then Thad, would you like separate motions or one motion for the consent agenda?
Double click my button there. I would like, even though it's a consent agenda, a motion on each one just because they are administrative actions.
Wonderful. All right, I will entertain a motion for the approval of the minor text modification for case 1.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Beal.
Ms. Fox,
Yes.
Mr. Fishman,
Yes.
Ms. Kennedy,
Yes.
Mr. Schneer,
Yes.
Ms. Call,
Yes.
Mr. Supalack,
Yes.
Mr. Grimes.
Yes.
I will entertain a motion for amended final development plan for Tim Hortons, case number 1.
So moved.
Second.
And just to call out, that does come with one condition. Ms. Beal?
Mr. Supalack,
Yes.
Mr. Grimes,
Yes.
Mr. Fishman,
Yes.
Ms. Call,
Yes.
Mr. Schneer,
Yes.
Ms. Fox,
Yes.
Ms. Kennedy.
Yes.
Thank you, Ms. Beal. Looking at case number 2, 20-182 AFDP, I will entertain a motion for the minor text modification.
So moved.
Thank you, Ms. Kennedy. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Supalack. Ms. Beal?
Mr. Fishman,
Yes.
Ms. Kennedy,
Yes.
Mr. Supalack,
Yes.
Mr. Grimes,
Yes.
Ms. Call,
Yes.
Mr. Schneer,
Yes.
Ms. Fox.
Yes.
Thank you, Ms. Beal. For the same case, a motion to approve, to approve the amended final development plan. I am looking for a motion.
So moved.
Thank you, Ms. Kennedy. Thank you, Mr. Grimes. Ms. Beal?
Ms. Fox,
Yes.
Mr. Fishman,
Yes.
Mr. Schneer,
Yes.
Mr. Supalack,
Yes.
Ms. Kennedy,
Yes.
Mr. Grimes,
Yes.
Ms. Call.
Yes. And finally, from the consent agenda, I'm looking for a motion to approve the amended final development plan.
So
So
moved.
moved.
Second.
Thank you. Ms. Beal?
Ms. Call,
Yes.
Mr. Grimes,
Yes.
Mr. Supalack,
Yes.
Mr. Fishman,
Yes.
Ms. Kennedy,
Yes.
Ms. Fox,
Yes.
Mr. Schneer,
Yes.
Thank you very much, Ms. Beal. Moving on to case number 4, Germain Honda, Phase 4, 20-184 PDP, located at 6715 Sawmill Road for a preliminary development plan. This application is a request for exterior building modification and associated site improvements for an existing car dealership on a 12.70 acre site. This site is located southwest of the intersection of Sawmill Road with Dublin Center Drive and is zoned Bridge Street District, Sawmill Center neighborhood. And Nikki, it looks like you have our agenda item today.
I do. Okay. Give me 1 second. I'll share my screen.
Thank you.
Are you able to see my PowerPoint? Yes, okay. Good evening. This is a request for review and approval of a preliminary development plan for Germain Honda. The site is located within the Bridge Street District. As such, this is the Bridge Street District 3-step review process, which begins with a concept plan, followed by a preliminary development plan, and finally by a final development plan. The Commission may recall that this concept plan was before you in 2020, and this is the second step in that process. Subsequent to an approval this evening, the applicant would be back before you with a final development plan in the future. As mentioned, the site is 12.7 acres in size and is located on the west side of Sawmill Road, just south of the intersection with Dublin Center Drive. The site was originally comprised of several parcels, which have since been combined. As such, the applicant is intending to create consistency and efficiency across the site with these improvements. A bit of background, as the Commission may remember from July, this is phase 4 of a multi-phase project. Phase 1 was originally approved by the administrative review team and included demolition of a small structure in the southeast portion of the site. In 2019, the administrative review team approved phase 2, which included parking layout modifications as well as lighting and interior landscape modifications. Phase 3 was for interior work only and was primarily for the new car store and the service drive. There will be future interior improvements to the used car store. Phase 4 is for consideration by the Commission this evening. Phase 4 includes the Sawmill Road frontage, as well as the facades of both the new car and used car stores, associated vehicle display, and pedestrian connectivity. An overview of the items included for your review tonight. There are both site and building items that the Commission is asked to weigh in on. Those include access and vehicular circulation, pedestrian connectivity, parking and lighting, landscaping, tree preservation, and vehicle display, as well as the details for buildings and any consideration for a future application for a master sign plan, which would be before you with the final development plan. So the updates that the applicant has made since the concept plan was originally before the Commission are highlighted here on the screen. The updates primarily address tree preservation through realigning the pedestrian connectivity along Sawmill Road, the addition of a shared use path on Dublin Center Drive, additional screening on the curvature of Dublin Center Drive with 56 new shrubs, and the elimination of duplicate signage and branding. In detail, access, circulation, and connectivity are as follows. The northernmost access point on Sawmill Road will be removed with the execution of the Phase 4 improvements. This was previously approved with Phase 2. In lieu of this access point, a new access point will be established along Dublin Center Drive. This is in alignment with the Bridge Street District Street Network map. Parking lot modifications are also proposed forward of the new car building. Forward of the used car building. The modifications to the used car building include the demolition of the existing pyramidal structure and the retention of the existing masonry building. With the demolition of the pyramidal structure along Sawmill Road, there will be opportunities to add additional parking. The character of this parking is proposed to match with pervious pavers. A curvilinear sidewalk is proposed along the Sawmill Road frontage. The curvilinear sidewalk includes landscape improvements as well as the new car store vehicle display pad. It's important to note here that based on the Commission's feedback, the applicant has eliminated the used car vehicle display pad. Additionally, the applicant has provided a shared use path along Dublin Center Drive. This was a result of the Commission's discussion as well as a site visit with the City of Dublin planning and engineering staff. Staff is conditioning that the shared use path be modified to be a sidewalk connection, as a sidewalk is in alignment with the surrounding pedestrian connectivity, and that additional sidewalk turn the corner from Sawmill Road to Dublin Center Drive, heading westward to the first access point. As mentioned, the applicant has eliminated the used car vehicle display area. These benefits are really multifold. First, there is the additional tree preservation of 4 healthy trees, as well as the additional screening of the structure provided by those existing trees. In order to accommodate this, the sidewalk has been realigned in this area, and the landscape will include dry laid limestone walls, as well as shrubs and seasonal plantings adjacent to each access point. The new car vehicle display design remains largely the same as reviewed at the concept plan stage. The intent is that the new car vehicle display will be at grade with the showroom and raised above the street and sidewalk level. Additional seasonal plantings will be used to highlight the new car display area, including grasses, hydrangea, honey locust, and dense yew shrubs. The landscape details have been highlighted in your staff report, but a few of note are also highlighted here, particularly the dry laid stone walls, a traditional material used throughout Dublin, however, here executed in a modern aesthetic, as well as the halo illuminated bollards intended for the vehicle display areas. Site lighting and site lighting modifications are also proposed with this application. The applicant has modernized a number of fixtures on the site in phases 1 and 2, however, is proposing additional modernization with new fixtures and LED bulbs with phase 4. Staff is conditioning that the applicant review and revise the photometric plan to ensure that the Bridge Street District lighting uniformity requirements are met and there are no hotspots on the site. The character for the new and used car stores is consistent with the concept shown to the Planning and Zoning Commission previously. You'll notice here that the new car store does not incorporate many of the Honda archetypal architectural forms, including the blue drum. In this case, the typically blue drum has been revised as a silver cylindrical entry feature. The existing facade will be repainted in an alabaster white, and all new storefront windows are proposed to be installed. With the modifications to the used car store, the applicant is proposing to match the character of the new car store using a combination of IFAS and storefront window. Also, for input this evening are proposed signs. There are a number of existing signs on the site which are reflective of the nature of the progression of the site over time. A total of 16 signs are proposed. The signs include 6 wall signs, 1 ground sign, and then 9 directional signs. Given the size of the site, providing both perimeter directional signs to the site and then also interior wayfinding has been identified as extremely important. So in detail, 3 wall signs are proposed for the new car store. The Honda logo is proposed on the cylindrical drum at approximately 43 square feet in size and 26 feet in height, as well as the dealer name and manufacturer name. The manufacturer name is duplicated on the pre-owned building, as well as an additional pre-owned sign differentiating the building from the new car store. And a single service center sign is proposed above the service drive. It's important to note here that the applicant has eliminated the oval service drive sign as well as the blue stripe over the service drive, as previously discussed by the Planning Commission. A ground sign is proposed at the intersection of Sawmill Road and Dublin Center Drive. This is a key gateway location within the Bridge Street District. Here, the applicant is showing a vehicle display pad with a curvilinear sidewalk, a dry-laid limestone base with individually mounted letters. This application has been reviewed against the Bridge Street District review criteria for a preliminary development plan, all of which have been found to be met with 5 conditions. With that, I would be happy to answer any questions. Otherwise, the applicant team is here as well this evening.
Thank you, Nikki. Before we get to questions, the applicant, do you have anything additional to add to Nikki's presentation tonight before we start asking questions?
Yes, I do. Good evening. Thank you, commission members, and thank you, Nikki, for that summary. And thank you to staff for meeting us out on site and walking around the entire perimeter to look at everything in very good detail. Overall, Nikki touched on it a little bit when she was talking about the signage. This site is an amalgamation of multiple sites that have slowly become one over the years. And our goal is to make them truly one campus. One Germain campus is kind of our goal through all 4 phases of this project. Nikki described in very good detail the changes we made since the concept plan. Removal of the display pad in front of pre-owned, reworking the sidewalk on Sawmill to save numerous trees on both the north and south ends, and the removal of the service signs. We had proposed that sidewalk on the southwest corner, and we reviewed staff's recommendations of the northern sidewalk, and we appreciate their recommendation. It avoids the biggest trouble spot on that Dublin Center drive, which is that corner where there are the most trees that would be affected by putting in a sidewalk, and also the largest amount of mounding that would have to be dealt with. We've reviewed staff's recommendations, and we don't have any issues with them at the moment. I'm here with Tom Hart of Isaac Wiles and Curtis Eckleberry, our civil engineer with Advanced Civil Design, and Greg Crobot, our landscape architect. We're happy to answer any questions the commission has.
Thank you, Mr. Todd. Looking to the commission, we'll cover staff and applicant questions at this time. Does anyone have any questions for either staff or the applicant? I have one, Nikki. Typically speaking, when we're looking at signage, we're looking at, one per frontage and then the option to add another. Can you go over what the allowable signage is for these particular buildings on this particular parcel in this particular zoning?
Yeah, absolutely. So given that there are 2 distinct buildings on a site that has frontage on 2 public streets, this site would be eligible per the code for either wall signs or ground signs. The code requires an applicant to select one or the other. If they opted for wall signs, they would be permitted a total of 240 square feet of wall signs, with no single sign exceeding 80 square feet in size, and a total of 3 wall signs. If the applicant elected ground signs are not permitted to be greater than 50 square feet in size, and they would be permitted 1 per frontage, up to 66 square feet in size cumulatively.
Thank you, Nikki. Any other questions for either staff or the applicant at this time from the commission? Okay, looking then to go into discussion. Mr. Supelak, do you want to kick us off this evening?
Sure. One, I think, how about this? There's a few sort of adjustments on the site relative to trees. I think I'm just generally saying relative to the front of the site. And I know we sort of touched on this previously. I think it's a really appropriate adjustment, right? Just clearing a little bit of space relative to the primary building. I applaud you guys for putting back and finding a way to put back the four others in front of the pre-owned building. I still think you have a generous sort of show area. This site continues to be sort of, I think, goofy, right? In that it's an accumulation of these renovations and adjustments over the years. It's multiple buildings. Even the primary Honda building sort of strangely comes all of a sudden right up to the street where others hadn't before it. They're starting to, right? Piata and Chase are starting to come up there with you. So I applaud you for trying to solve for this. I don't really have any qualms about much of anything. I do think the addition of the sidewalk is the right thing to do here, even though it, you know what I mean, the whole area isn't yet sidewalked, but it'll promote all that as the rest of the city comes up the hill towards all this, and it gets new energy. So I applaud that. It does look like, and you know what I mean, Jenny and Nicole, obviously relative to that, there's some concessions on the trees that we're conceding trees to put in a sidewalk to make it work, right? The nature of sort of landscaping and the bounds of what we're asking for. But I think it's the right thing to do. This site is, I'm just pointing out, this site has trees from years ago, and they are now mature and thick and robust. And so to have a couple of places where we open that up, I don't think is such a bad thing. I know we're probably going to go headlong into a conversation about signs and sign counts. It's also a big, complicated site. I really don't have much issue with the wayfinding signs around here. I actually don't have, I don't mind much in the signage package, but I'm sure that's going to become a debate with us here shortly.
Thank you, Mr. Supelak. Ms. Kennedy, do you want to go next?
Thank you, Ms. Call. I'm really pleased to see the changes that have been made based on the last feedback that was given to the applicant. Specifically, looking at, again, as Mr. Supelak pointed out, the tree preservation at the pre-owned building. I think that's fantastic. And the front of this property, I think, just looks, it maintains the green character of Dublin with the greenery. I think that's really, it really speaks to the home and the location, and it looks like a great border around the sawmill to kind of set the property back a little bit. I did drive the property just because I was going to hammer you on the sign count, but again, as Mr. Supelak pointed out, it is a massive property, and from the road, the signs don't seem to be overwhelming to a customer coming in. So obviously you place them appropriately where you feel it'll help the customer navigate the property. And since most of the signs are on the kind of the interior of the property, the back end, I think it's the number 7, the interior wayfinding signs primarily are kind of insulated from what you would see just driving by the property. I don't have issue with the sign count, based on that, because it's not kind of in your face as you're, approaching the property. Maybe I'll stop with that for now and let someone else chime in.
Thank you, Ms. Kennedy. Mr. Schneer.
I was struck when I thought about this project, that we're not starting with a blank sheet of paper, and I think the applicants to be commended for the effort to take these disparate buildings and create a campus environment. so I'm impressed. I think the changes that we've requested, I think the applicant has listened to. I'm a little, this whole sidewalk issue is sort of a bridge to nowhere, on Sawmill, as far as I'm concerned, and they're doing their part. How we get continuity is not really a burden we can place exclusively on them, but we've all commented that we hope that as Sawmill gets redeveloped, there's more sidewalks. But we've all looked at this property for a long time, and it always was this hodgepodge of buildings. And you look at it now, and the cohesiveness really is impressive. So there might be a few nits here and there, but I take a longer view point of this, and I'm pleased.
Thank you, Mr. Schneer. Mr. Grimes?
I too am pleased with the project and its format. And I'm appreciative also for the work to be done along Sawmill Road, because I think, as much as it doesn't have a lot of connectivity around, as mentioned, it does give a visual appeal for so many into the future, saying this is what we want. This is the kind of area that we expect people to have to freely move around in a walkable city, and the rest will come in time, I'm sure of that. The sign package, as mentioned, it is a big property, and wayfinding is very necessary. I can't remember a time when they didn't have a ton of inventory. They always have lots of inventory. And so that makes it even more necessary for those that may be less familiar with the site to have all that signage to direct them. And the unifying of all the buildings and structures together into a common theme is really important. I think not only for the city, but also for the customers and the owner as well. So I like it. I think that's all I have to say. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Grimes. Mr. Fishman?
Yes, I don't have much to add. I'm real concerned about the landscaping and mixing it with the sidewalk. I think that Mr. Grimes' point's well taken. I was going to say something similar, that we always seem to set the state when each individual thing we do, we try to set the stage for the next thing coming up. And even though this might be a sidewalk to nowhere now, it probably won't be eventually. And Sawmill Road really lacks a pedestrian transportation avenue. I mean, so sidewalk, bike path, whatever, I think it's a good idea. I would like to see us save and as many trees as we can, and so especially perimeter trees. You can because I think that if you look, I had 2 roads Sawmill today, and if you look at it, it's getting more and more commercial and more blacktop. And so I think that each site we work with, I think we should make sure we have as much landscaping as possible. I'm not saying that Jermaine hasn't done a pretty good job, but I like to see, they sure lost a lot of tree caliber. I was kind of shocked when I realized what we did at the preliminary and as far as getting rid of the caliber of trees. So I would like to see as much perimeter caliber as we can get when they work that out with staff. And other than that, I agree with the rest of my colleagues. I think it's a great improvement. But remember, you're coming up that hill, and I think it's real important to have as much landscaping as we can get.
Thank you, Mr. Fishman. Ms. Fox?
Okay. I was not here on July 20th last year, so this is the first time I've seen it. So I'm getting to see it with some fresh eyes. I know that it's gone through phases, and I think the cohesiveness of the phases is really nice. A couple of questions that I have, or comments. I really think that the sidewalk is probably as important, if not more important, than the keeping the trees, which I think are important as well. But as you drive down Sawmill, and I visited the site too, both in the daytime and the evening, I noticed that there is no place for any pedestrian to walk. There is a bus stop, but there's no place to stand. I saw people working on utilities, but there's no place to get to that site. So sidewalks along Sawmill are really important. I really like the curvature of the sidewalk. I think that gives a friendlier feel than just a straight sidewalk, and with the landscape, I think that'll be inviting. I agree that we need to have it along Dublin Center Drive, and I understand about not putting it on the curve. And I think in fairness to the applicant, knowing that John Shields Parkway at some point will be extended, you might put in a sidewalk that gets torn up in about, I don't know, 10 years, and I would hate to see you spend, time and money for that. But because you're putting in so much more, I think that's a fair thing to ask of you. I do want to make a suggestion, though. Sawmill Road is a gateway from 270, and I know that when we go in, when we drive down there, there's two things that I noticed. The large sign on the ground that has the two cars, that is, and you're going to ask for a master sign plan. It would be really nice if you could come up with a design that was more to the intent of the Bridge Street District's master sign plan objective, which is something that's more fun, more whimsical, more eye-catching, more artistic than just the name. And I'll make a couple of suggestions just to think about. You couldn't use your wave. You couldn't use your wave on the building, but maybe you could use it there. Or I noticed that Honda has a vintage wings that used to be in their old logos. I don't know if that's something illuminated that would be an interesting eye catcher, but artistic in the signage, which maybe would be a lot more interesting to anybody driving by than just, not that the main name couldn't be on the sign. I mean, you'd have to be within the limits of whatever, but maybe a piece of artistic work that would make the sign much more interesting than just the name. So I would like to make that suggestion. And then also in front of the new car lot where you have the curved stone wall, which I like the fact that there's change in elevation and your bollards illuminate the sidewalk there. Where on the left-hand side under the Germain name where you have a couple cars, is it possible to create a sitting area for your customers? That we did ask the Lexus dealership to do something like this. And really from the street, you really actually stop and notice that this is a place that you don't just drive in and out of. You might go in there, have a cup of coffee, wait on your car, talk to the dealership. It's an opportunity at the street level to create what I would just call a sort of a social connection to the sidewalk and a social connection to the street. I know that you're on the far end of Sawmill, and that makes it kind of hard, but you have a length of 866 foot along Sawmill there, and maybe having the opportunity to put that kind of a seating area would create a stop and stay interest that the Bridge Street intends that we do. One of the things that the intention of Bridge Street in doing that is, I had a little note, and I can quote it in the code, but it's really about having you stop in there and maybe walk to the next retail building. Now I know that's kind of hard because you have 866 length, but you don't know what's going to be next door. What if it's a Panera, or what if it's it's a little restaurant? So you just have the ability to have someone come in, have a cup of coffee, sit and wait for their car, or maybe walk to the bookstore next door. I don't really know what's going to happen in the future, but I think that if we ask you to install some of these little social connection elements now, we might be surprised as the jigsaw works its way down Sawmill what we've actually able to accomplish. Chase Bank, when we was on the corner, a new one's coming. They're doing that at their gateway, and they're across the street from Piata. So we've already made that connection, and it might help to be able to do that with yours. The only other question I had for you was lighting. When I went by, the lighting to me seemed uniform from the front of Sawmill all the way to the back. And I wondered if you were going to do any kind of lighting that actually is like what I would call front porch lighting, that's a different kind of lighting that illuminates your front yard versus lighting that illuminates your inventory parking. Is there any plan for that to have a different kind of a lighting effect?
That was somewhat the goal of the lit bollards around that display pad, was trying to create that atmosphere there along the sidewalk.
Okay.
Is what we're going for in front of the new car showroom.
Okay. Is there any chance that you can extend that with more distance that has a more interesting lighting effect? I guess I'm looking to make sure you get an enhancement of your property, but maybe not the traditional Sawmill freeway look. Do you know what I'm saying? I like the bollards. I think that's great. I'm just wondering if there's any opportunity for you to have, I don't know how else to call it, front porch lighting. You know, it's sort of a softer lighting that, I don't even know if soft is the word, but it creates a different effect than just an overall wash that you would get over the inventory parking. Does that make sense?
Yeah, more accent lighting.
I guess that's probably what I'm looking for.
I think that's something that we could consider and look into, how we could make that sort of effect.
I think lighting can be something that draws people towards it if it feels comfortable versus just lighting of a parking lot, which sometimes makes pedestrians feel intimidated by the glare of it all. So I think that's what I'm asking for the Sawmill, the piece that you have on Sawmill, to be as inviting to the pedestrian and to people driving by as possible. So those are my thoughts.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Fox. Ms. Kennedy?
Thank you, Ms. Call. I think Ms. Fox brought up an interesting point about outdoor seating. And I think you were referring more, Jane, to maybe the casual passerby to have someplace, that they could stop and sit perhaps. But it made me think, I didn't see in the plans, but Mr. Todd, is there any kind of customer outdoor space?
Not at the moment, aside from the display pad out front and the display pad that's much further back on the pre-owned building.
Okay. And again, maybe this is a complement or an addition to what Jane covered, but perhaps some outdoor space for customers themselves as people are getting their car serviced. And I know you have nice coffee machines in there and customers can get a refreshment, but someplace they can be outside too and enjoy the outside space a little bit, especially because you have that beautiful frontage. I mean, with the trees and the display pads and people, you want to draw people into those display pads and see that product. So just a consideration, as a customer myself, I would love to have an outdoor space as well as an option.
Right. That's what I meant too, Christina. Right there on that pad, maybe on the left end of the Germain letters, might be an opportunity for that. But it would be nice. I don't know also whether or not this may not be their responsibility, but it would be nice to have a bench if there was, a place for transit stops. But that might not be the responsibility. I think the most important thing is to have something on site, though.
Thank you.
Thank you, ladies. And thank you, Mr. Todd. Looking at, I'll tie us out with comments this evening. Mr. Fishman, did I go to you? I don't remember if I did.
Yes.
Okay. I had a panic moment there. I thought I skipped you.
I pretty much agreed with everybody. I'm pretty enthused about the sidewalk, and everybody made really good comments. I think that'll set the stage on Sawmill Road, and I think that's something that people have talked about for years, that you really can't walk on Sawmill Road. And I think that's going to be real exciting precedent to set when we have 180 feet of sidewalk space with trees and so on. I like Jane's comment about being inviting, and maybe we could put something toward near that, very close to that sidewalk where people can stop when they're walking up Sawmill Road, so.
And I appreciate the comments. I do want to make sure that we're not overburdening the applicant with unrequired items. We do love Dublin, and we love all the things that make Dublin wonderful. And so we are definitely ones to give suggestions and opinions to make projects even better. So thank you for considering that. And, Christina, being a customer, especially, she has younger kids. For me, I car shop about as much as I want to go get a root canal. But when I go, my husband and I have actually announced, if you can get us in and out in 30 minutes, we'll buy a car. If not, we're leaving. So I'm one of the people who, you can't get me out of there fast enough. I'll sign the check, whatever I need to do, and then I'm leaving. As far as the project itself, I think it's fantastic. You listen to pretty much everything that we said. You look at those front car paths and the preservation of trees. We love our trees in Dublin. And the sidewalk connectivity, not just for, walkability, but also for safety. We live in a snowy environment. And so when it snows and when the plows run, the grass area, that curb area, gets quite piled up with snow. And so in order for people to walk, they walk in the road. And that's not safe, especially during the winter months when it gets dark really early and those light hours are very, very short. So thank you very much for listening to our suggestions the last time. And thank you for bringing a product forward that I think we can all be very, very proud of. At this time, I'd like to ask staff, has any public comment been received on this particular item?
We have no public comment on this application.
Thank you. And a thank you to staff also. I know your hard work and effort went into this as well. So Commission, looking back to you, at this time I will entertain a motion to approve the preliminary development plan with 5 conditions.
Move.
Thank you, Mr. Grimes. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Supalack. Ms. Kennedy, should you have a question?
I just want to confirm, should we display the conditions and just confirm that the applicant is in favor or in agreement?
Certainly we can.
And Rebecca, can I ask you, we made some suggestions here, and this is a preliminary development plan, and it is the only opportunity that some of these suggestions can be incorporated. So we did have our comments, but we didn't have a chance to actually get any consensus on those comments before we made them. So, and I didn't get a chance to hear from the applicant, he said yes to some of the suggestions, or he understood, but I don't know if it's going anywhere. So I think before we move, I would like to at least have an idea if there's any consensus for the other commissioners about some of the comments that.
So I did hear suggestions. I didn't hear conditions. So if you could run through the items that you'd like to consider adding for conditions, then we can do a straw poll and look.
Well, yes, and I think that the condition, well, first of all, I would just ask the applicant if there's any appetite here to add any kind of outdoor seating for your customers. And if the rest of the commission doesn't think that that's essential, then I don't see any reason to put a condition on it. But I'm looking for, some thoughts on that.
Jane, I'll jump in here, and I guess I'm agree with Rebecca. I didn't necessarily hear them as conditions. I heard, and Dustin, maybe there's a response here once I finish. I heard there's appetite for benches, right? Which I'm sure you can go away with and find opportunity for benches, because those are it's not just our one. It does make the campus better, and in choice locations around some of the pads, that might be a really appropriate addition. I don't know that we collectively, I don't know that I heard it as a condition. I also heard suggestion or I'm saying permission to entertain something better at that Germain, the corner sign, the ground sign, which given the chance, I'm a good designer will always sink their teeth into that. So I'm sure Dustin will welcome that and entertain it and improve that. I don't know that, I guess I don't know that these need to be conditions. The sign is adequate. We'd love to see it better.
Okay. Can we also clarify the sidewalk? I'm sorry, clarify the sidewalk, exactly, we're getting the full length of Sawmill Road and then around the corner. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, that's what's in here. I just want to make sure that's, because we talked about.
On the north corner, correct, Nikki? Yes.
Yeah, so the entire Sawmill Road frontage, the north leg of Dublin Center Drive, stopping at the first access point, and then the western side of Dublin Center Drive, stopping at the second access point.
Okay. Yes, that's what I understood.
I did too. I just want to make sure that was.
Okay.
So, Mr. Todd, looking back to you, the suggestions that have been made tonight to consider the gateway sign, so to speak, as not just an identification of the business itself, but also something that's artsy, so to speak, and the addition of some resting places, whether those be benches, some type of seating arrangement within the parcel itself. Would those be things that you would consider and work with staff?
Yes, I definitely think those are things that we would work with staff on.
Okay, so if it's amenable to you, then if we could have Nikki add a condition that is just applicant will work with staff to consider resting places in the site. Nikki, do we have any vernacular that calls out seating, so to speak?
Yeah, I can add a condition that the applicant work with staff to identify seating locations and identify the product.
Okay.
And I just want to say, Mr. Todd, that I wasn't really thinking that you need to sprinkle benches all through your site. I understand you have security issues, right? And you don't want people just sitting all over I understand that. I was thinking more that if somewhere close to your building on that pad, that you have the ability for your customers to sit, and then they would be interacting with, the sidewalk, people might walk by if it becomes busier. It's more for your own good. You need the safety of having a place. And I'm the kind of person that comes and stays and waits for my car to get fixed. So it's nice to sit outside in the sun and read my book and have my coffee. So I was thinking more than that. And I don't want you to feel as if you need to sprinkle benches all up and down Sawmill Road. That wasn't my intention. So I want to be clear about that.
And just housekeeping item for commission, if there are certain things that you do want to make conditional based on use, I think that they are good to highlight and to bring back to the commission, so that there isn't the appearance of undue burden placed on an applicant over and above what's required by the code. So Nikki, are you able to present conditions? And then Thad, looking to you, I do have a motion and a second on the floor. Do we need to vote on that to clear it in order to go with the 6th condition recommendation? Because the motion was for motion to approve with 5 conditions.
What you could do instead of clearing the existing motions on the floor is just move to amend by adding the additional condition, adopt that amendment, and then move forward with the vote on the motion as amended to include the 6th condition.
Preferred. Thank you.
So move the amendment.
Second.
Thank you for the first and the second. Nikki, could you present those 6 conditions just so we can verify? And Mr. Todd, I'll look to you before we proceed with the vote.
We take no issue with the 6 conditions.
Thank you, Mr. Todd. Ms. Beal.
Ms. Fox,
Yes.
Ms. Call,
Yes.
Mr. Fishman,
Yes.
Mr. Supalack,
Yes.
Mr. Schneer,
Yes.
Mr. Grimes,
Yes.
Ms. Kennedy.
Yes.
Thank you, Ms. Beal. Well, Mr. Todd and company, thank you very much for joining with us tonight.
Wait.
Yes.
I think we just approved the amendment. Do we have to now also approve the motion?
I believe the amendment was made to the original motion and the vote was on the motion. Mr. That can you?
There was a vote on the amendment to add the 6th, and then there's a final vote on the motion as amended. So we do need that second one.
Ms. Beal.
Mr. Schneer,
Yes.
Ms. Kennedy,
Yes.
Mr. Fishman,
Yes.
Ms. Fox,
Yes.
Mr. Grimes,
Yes.
Ms. Call,
Yes.
Mr. Sublak.
Yes.
Thank you, Ms. Beal, and thank you, Mr. Sublak. All right, now, Mr. Todd and company, thank you very much for joining with us tonight. We certainly are appreciative of all the work and looking into making this product something that we'll be proud to have in the city of Dublin for decades to come. So thank you for your time this evening, and we wish you all the luck to have speedy resolution.
Thank you very much.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to, this evening, cases 5 and 6 will be heard together. I will read both cases into the record. The Overlook at Tartan Ridge, Highland Croy and McKittrick Road, Final Development Plan and Final Plat, cases 20-170 FDP and 20-171 FP. The first application, 20-170 FDP, is a request for review and approval of final details for development of a 24.5 acre site with 56 single-family homes, 7.9 acres of open space, and 5 public streets. The site is northeast of the intersection of Highland Croy Road with McKittrick Road and zoned planned unit development Tartan Ridge sub-area F. The second application, 20-171 FP, is a request for review and recommendation of approval to City Council for a final plat to set aside 24.5 acres to establish 56 single-family lots, 7.9 acres of open space, and 5 public rights-of-way. Mr. Ridge, Chase, it looks like you have our presentation this evening.
I do, yeah, thank you. Give me one moment to get this started. Okay, can you see this okay? Okay. So as was mentioned, this is a request for review and approval of a final development plan, as well as a request for a recommendation of approval to City Council of a final plat, both of which are for the Overlook at Tartan Ridge. Final development plan and final plat are really the third steps to a 3-step approval process for PUDs. You may recall that this came before the Planning and Zoning Commission in July of 2019 as a concept plan. Then again in December of 2019 as a preliminary development plan and preliminary plat. That was subsequently forwarded to City Council, where it was approved in February of 2020. And so before you today is the final development plan. As a reminder, final development plans are really for review for compliance with approved preliminary development plan, as well as the development text. You'll also be seeing some of those final landscape and design details today. The site is highlighted in yellow on your screen. It is approximately 24 acres in size and is situated northeast of the intersection of Highland Croy Road and McKittrick Road. The site is situated west of Tartan Ridge, north of Tartan West, south of Glacier Ridge Elementary School, and east of Glacier Ridge Metro Park. The site is currently undeveloped, but does contain a stormwater management pond in the northwest corner of the site, as well as a silo in the southwest corner of the site. So for a brief overview of the final development plan, this is for the construction of 56 single-family homes on approximately 24 acres. Lot sizes come in 2 sizes, courtyard and patio, which I'll describe in more detail here shortly. Also proposed is 7.9 acres of open space, as well as the associated public streets, sidewalks, and shared use paths. So jumping into development standards, this is obviously outlined in the approved development text. But again, the lot sizes, the first being courtyard lots. These are going to be primarily on the exterior of the site, closest to Highland Croy and McKittrick. These lots are a minimum of 60 feet in width at the building line, 125 feet in length, and have a minimum of 15 to 25 feet front yard setbacks, minimum 25 feet rear yard setbacks, and 6-foot side yard setbacks. Lot coverage is limited to 60%. And as you can see here on the left-hand side, the lot typicals the hedgerow and pillars, which are also required by the development text. The second lot size is called a patio lot. So these are going to be primarily to the interior of the site. These are a minimum of 52 feet in width at the building line. The minimum length remains 125 feet, and setbacks and lot coverage remain the same. Architecture is regulated by the development text, which calls for European country and Midwestern vernacular styles. So these styles present prominent street presence and clean intersecting lines. The approved development text also regulates roof types, exterior materials, and application materials, as well as items such as shutters and windows. The applicant has provided a map showing neighborhood connectivity. So all of the existing and proposed paths are outlined in black here on your screen. Obviously, the applicant is proposing sidewalks throughout the development and the new public streets, but also is constructing shared use paths along the perimeter of the site, so along McKittrick and Highland Croy. And these are really connecting into existing paths and the larger network as a whole. What you see here is a site plan. This one shows the kind of the scope of the landscaping. So since the preliminary development plan, the applicant has increased landscaping along Highland Croy Road. This is found in a naturalized mix of deciduous, ornamental, and evergreen trees. Mounding is also provided along Highland Croy and McKittrick roads, and the applicant has removed a dry basin at the southeast corner of the site in favor of landscaping per the request of the Planning and Zoning Commission. As part of the landscape plan, the applicant has provided recommended hedge species for the hedgerows in the neighborhood. So these are generally going to be by street with special attentions paid to corner lots. Species include green velvet boxwoods, vintage gold cypress, and gray owl juniper. As required by the development text and proposed in the landscape plan, pillars are to be located at the entry to every lot, at the entry of the driveway. These will be constructed of stone and brick and capped with a limestone precast concrete cap. They are proposed at 5 feet 4 inches in height. However, staff is recommending that the height of the pillars be lowered to be more in line with what you see existing in Tartan Ridge today. At the request of staff, the applicant has also provided a landscape section. So this shows Highland Croy on the left and then the proposed homes on the right. And so what you're seeing here is street trees along Highland Croy and the shared use path, mounding, and then the perimeter buffer, and how that all relates and screens traffic from Highland Croy and from the new construction homes. As part of the final development plan, the applicant has also provided a sign plan. So this, what you're seeing here, is proposed to be located at McKittrick Road and Brenham Way. It is an engraved cast stone sign with black copy and is situated atop a stone veneer monument, which is finished with a cast stone cap. The sign is proposed at 25 square feet in size, and is a maximum of 6 feet in height at its tallest. What you're seeing here is the Overlook Feature. The Overlook Feature is to include a pavilion and fireplace, a double-sided fireplace, as well as a multi-level patio and a variety of furniture options. The image on the left here is the pavilion from each elevation. The pavilion is to be constructed of cedar and stone primarily, and will be sheathed in a dimensioned asphalt shingle. Finally, what you're seeing here, the materials proposed for the Overlook Feature. The Overlook itself is to be clad in a Provia Ohio vintage limestone veneer. So that's in the bottom left-hand corner there, and that'll be topped with a cast stone cap, which you see in the top left-hand corner. And then the patio is proposed to be a exposed aggregate concrete, which is on the bottom in the center. And the applicant is also proposing several furniture options here as well. You may have noticed that all of these materials and furniture are to be as shown here or owner approved equal. Staff is just recommending that if another material or furniture selection is desired by the applicant, that they come to staff for approval prior to installation. And then finally, what you see here is the final plat. So this subdivides the site into 56 lots, 7.9 acres of open space, and 5 public rights of way. This was reviewed against all applicable criteria. Staff is recommending approval of the final plat with 1 condition and of the final development with 5 conditions. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you all may have, and the applicant is also in attendance tonight. Thank you.
Does the applicant want to make a statement before we go into the next part of our agenda?
Sure. Gary Smith, G2 Planning and Design. I'm here on behalf of the applicant. I also have with me Kevin McCauley and Jim Olin from Romanelli and Hughes. I think generally, we're very excited about this project. It's come a long way. We've had a lot of discussions with the Planning Commission and the council to get to this point. We've gotten a lot of help from staff. I think generally we're in agreement with all of staff's conditions. I think the biggest concern that we have at this point is still, I think there's some I guess, difference in our opinion versus staff's opinion over the tree replacement requirements. One of the things that we had always envisioned was that all of the additional plantings, excuse me, in the buffer would count towards our tree replacement. I think the staff has calculated it a little bit differently and is asking us to provide an additional approximately 200 inches. I think from our standpoint, there's a technical difference here, but we're already providing a total of approximately 570 new trees on this site, including everything that we're planting. I mean, obviously some of them are required by code. Everything we're planting in the street, in the buffer, the street trees, the replacement trees, including the landscape trees. We have right now, just shown on the plan, we have a total of 1,200 inches. And that really, I think we feel that more than compensates for the 53 trees that are being removed to make way for this development. We've got a considerable number of trees on this. As you can see, we've, going back to that image that he showed of the buffer, we've, as per the Planning Commission's request, we've added a considerable number of trees to that buffer line. And so we've got a really dense, heavy planted buffer. We've got some really dense, heavy planting. One of the things I think we would be willing to do, staff has asked that we remove some of the trees around the pond and relocate those. I think we would be willing to relocate those kind of into the buffer areas. But we would, I guess, like the Planning Commission's consideration on the issue of the trees. I think to penalize the applicant, with another 100 trees, required for this, I think is maybe a little overkill. And I think it maybe goes beyond the city's intent of what they're really trying to accomplish with the tree replacement code. I feel like we've met the spirit intent of that, and hopefully the planning commission will feel that as well.
Now, Mr. Smith, just a clarification there. I thought earlier you had said 100 inches of trees, and you just stated 100 trees.
Well, no, I'm sorry. According to my calculations, and I'm not sure, and I sent this in my response letter to staff, so I didn't get a disagreement, but by my calculation, I think staff's interpretation is that our total tree requirement based on code and tree replacement was 1,421 inches, and our recollection or our calculation or what we're providing on the plan is 1,202 inches. So it's a difference of 200 inches, which equates to approximately 100 trees.
Thank you for that. Luckily, we have staff who's done this more than once or twice. So
I'm sure, yeah.
Chase, if we could go back to you and just look for clarification on tree replacement, could you call out code and the history behind?
Yeah, so there are essentially the way staff was calculating this, there's three requirements. There's a street tree requirement, tree replacement requirement, and then the buffer requirement, which is written into the development text. So the 1,400 tree or 1,400 inches is essentially each one of those calculated separately. Now, it's our understanding that potentially the applicant's intent was, and I don't want to speak for the applicant, so please jump in, Gary, but the applicant's intent was to overplant the buffer to essentially compensate for some of those required replacement trees. And so that's where that 200 inches is difference is coming from. It's really a interpretation and calculation difference between staff and the applicant. Staff is recommending a couple of conditions which really work together to address this. And so one of them being that the applicant continue to work with staff to fulfill the replacement requirements, subject to staff approval, and that the applicant plant no more than 1/3 of the required replacement trees in the buffer. So essentially what we're saying there is some leeway potentially given the amount of trees that are being replaced to increase the buffer utilizing what was required replacement inches, if that makes sense.
Yeah, can you restate? I'm struggling a little bit with the wording on condition number 3. Plant no more than 1/3 of the required tree replacement inches to fulfill the buffer requirements. So can you clarify that a little bit?
Yeah, and let me bring that up. I apologize. Number 3 that the applicant. Yeah, and so that is the trees that were taken down that were that are 6 inches or greater in breast height are to be replaced. So what we're saying there is that the applicant replace no more than 1/3 of those in the buffer.
Got it. So essentially the applicant may use up to 1/3 of the required tree replacement in the buffer.
That is, yeah, that's correct.
Thank you.
I can confirm. Chase is right. When we started this project and we went through Planning Commission the first time, the way that we put this together and calculated it was we initially looked at it and said, okay, what kind of buffer would normally be required, and then we basically took what we thought were the required replacement trees, added them to the buffer to bring the buffer to you. As part of the rezoning, and so our intent was that some of those would be buffer trees, some of those would be replacement trees. And unfortunately, the way that we wrote the code, and I think we're getting caught kind of in a technicality here, the way that we wrote the code included everything together, but we didn't really specify that, a portion of those were to be used for tree replacement. And I remember discussing this as part of the planning commission meetings, but it's been, over a year. So I think that's where kind of the difference is. And I think what Chase has said is what staff is doing is they're reading exactly the way that we wrote the zoning text and saying, no, you guys wrote all these trees into your zoning text, so you still owe us some replacement trees. And our version is, oh, wait a minute, our intent here was, and what we tried to accomplish was this. So I think that's where the difference is. And I think, again, we're planting so many trees on this site already, and have increased the buffer beyond what we brought to you at the preliminary development plan substantially. And so we're hoping that the planning commission will consider that and show some leniency here.
Thank you for that clarity. Let's go to the commission for questions for both the applicant and staff at this point. So Jane, do you want to go first?
Well, I think Nikki had a comment she wanted to make there. So Nikki, do you want to say that first?
Yeah, thank you, Councilmember Fox. I just wanted to provide some additional clarity, I guess, both on the process and how we came to the conclusion on that condition. So first and foremost, the preliminary development plan, which includes the development text or the code regulations, was adopted by council. And unfortunately, the final development plan does not afford us the flexibility to make an interpretation that is not explicitly identified in the development text. So I would ask the commission to keep that in mind. And then secondly, the condition regarding not more than 1/3 of the required replacement inches basically be double counted in the buffer. That is consistent with our interpretation for recently approved neighborhoods. So basically we are asking the applicant to meet the same standard in alignment with previous approvals by the Planning and Zoning Commission.
Thank you for that clarity, Ms. Martin. All right, looking back, Ms. Kennedy, you want to go first?
I just want to kind of drill this in a little bit more. So staff has recommendations for where these additional trees, and maybe this is a question for Mr. Ridge. Mr. Ridge, staff has or can come up with recommendations for locations of this additional 200 inches beyond the buffer zone, correct?
Yeah, landscape staff was confident in their ability to find locations for the additional inches.
And then just a follow-up question then on the stormwater, the movement of trees. So Mr. Ridge, again, the request of the applicant was to move trees for like maybe walkability around that zone, or for a different reason?
Yeah, so really the intent with that was to open up a vista from the west to the stormwater management pond and amenity area. So staff was just trying to open that up essentially for view, open views.
Okay, so is the applicant in agreement with moving trees then, or it sounded like a no maybe? I'm just trying to get.
Oh no, we have no issue with moving trees. We would certainly be, if the staff wants us to open up a view into the pond area, we would be happy to move those trees into other areas of the site. If we do that, I guess all we're asking for is really just kind of some leniency on the additional 200 inches. At this point, I mean, it's getting, the amount of trees that we're putting on the site, it's getting somewhat punitive for the developer here.
Well,
You can go to the next person, Rebecca. Those are my only couple initial questions.
Thank you, Ms. Kennedy. Any other questions for either applicant or staff at this time? Mr. Schneer.
A question for staff. Chase, what is the access to the amenity to the patio? Is that just from the interior or from the exterior of the development?
Yeah, the access to the amenity is from the interior. So that'll be a path is proposed from the curve of one of the new public streets into the amenity area. There's not proposed to be access from the shared use path on the exterior of the site.
That's what I thought. And the reason I ask is that in the report, it says that it provides a unique opportunity for the residents and general public to spend time at the amenity. So, but the amenity is not open. It's not dedicated for public use, and it's generally not open for public use. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. So it's an amenity for the residents.
Yes.
Okay. Makes sense.
Any other questions, Mr. Mayor?
No.
Mr. Grimes.
Yes, in that same general area and in the history of the discussion, was there ever consideration of putting a connection from the interior to the shared path along Highland Croy? I understand that it's not probably the better idea to put it from where the pond overlook is, but perhaps towards the corner of McKittrick and Highland between lots 7 and 8, perhaps there's an area there where residents don't have to either walk through the school property if they want to go to the Glacier Ridge, or go back down to the Brenham Way and then walk back up McKittrick to cross over. I was just thinking that it might be more convenient access for the residents. It would be easy enough to put up a private area sign if they wanted to limit it for residents only, but it would seem to me convenient for the residents to access through a path there to the corner, and also a safe place to cross over into the park across the street. Is there any history there?
Yeah, we did have several discussions on that during the planning commission process for the preliminary development plan. Was the developer's desire not to include some connections, especially beside the amenity area, because that is specifically going to be maintained by the HOAs for the use of the residents, the HOA. After those discussions, we moved forward with the approval of the zoning without those connections. And it would be our position that we would prefer to keep those connections out.
Will the paths be maintained by the HOA then?
In terms of the internal sidewalks and the path to the overlook would certainly be maintained by the HOA, I believe. The paths along, Kevin, what is the agreement for the paths along Highland Croy and McKittrick? Do you recall?
They are part of the overall HOA, and to be honest, on a perimeter property like this, I don't know who does that. I mean, it's definitely either the overall HOA or the city of Dublin. I don't know who would do that. Anybody from Dublin may be able to answer that one for us.
Does anybody know that makes a difference? If it's a public path, then the public should have access to it. If it's not a public path, then and the HOA is maintaining it, then you can look at it differently.
And remember, we're dealing with two HOAs here. We have the master HOA and the sub HOA.
But you're also talking about the perimeter, Warren, so the public has access to it regardless who's maintaining it. They have access to it. It's the perimeter of the property. It's the outline. But this was already discussed, approved, and done at zoning. We all had this discussion. Look at the minutes, review this history. We were discussed looking at this and making the access, and it was approved without it. This isn't the time and place to be asking for something that's approved zoning. It's not part of code. It's not trees. This is, if we're going to, let's change the architecture on the houses and the streets and everything else. This is not the time and the place for this.
Thank you, Mr. Colley. We'll continue on with discussion at this time. Ms. Fox, do you want to go next?
Sure. I have a couple of questions. I'm thinking, when it comes to the trees, we all want to save our trees. So I'm trying to think outside the box here. The most important aspect of wanting to keep trees or to replace trees or to require trees is that we have an aesthetic as you come along the roadway that's extremely beautiful. And Highland Croy is that roadway that people really love. So I have a couple of questions about the mounding at the, I want to compliment you, one, first and foremost, on the amenity of the pond overlook. I think that you just set one of the most wonderful standards for every other developer that's going to come before us. So all I can tell you is, if I were in the market for a house right now in an empty nester community, that amenity would draw me so quickly because you thought about social connections for people there who live there and usable social connection. So I want to compliment you on that. I think that's worth the compliment. It's a lovely amenity. And because it's so pretty, I understand why staff wants to open up the view shed a little bit. And I think that it's important to have a nice peak. You see it along Muirfield Drive when you see these wonderful little open lakes with the gazebos, or which are now, this is beat the gazebo by 100%. So, you know, I'm looking to try to figure out exactly where you might put a whole bunch more trees. So I have some sympathy for maybe not including 200 more trees.
And then for clarity, 200 inches.
Inches.
100 more trees. But I would be open to the possibility of opening up the look into the pond area, leaving certainly some trees, and utilizing some of those to satisfy some of your requirement, because I think that if we're asking you to move them, there might be it seems pretty dense. If this is an accurate representation, it seems pretty dense. I would leave it up to staff as to what, how many trees you would remove and what that difference would be. But it seems like, to me, the object here is to create a really lovely view shed into parts of your development that make for an attractive streetscape. So I'm a little sympathetic to maybe not forcing every one of those trees, but creating the aesthetic that we're looking for by being really dedicated to making sure that streetscape around into that view into that pond is as lovely as can be.
Thank you, Ms. Cox. And I'm going to pause discussion very quickly just to see if we have received any public comment on this item.
We've received no public comment on this application.
Thank you, Ms. Martin. Continuing on with commission discussion. Yes, Mr. Fishman.
Since we're on trees, I think we should use all the trees we can use. You don't seem to, we never get too many trees, especially in a development that's this dense. And we talked earlier about in the buffer, putting those trees in the buffer. I don't think we can make the buffer too dense. I think we should require the trees we do to every other developer, and find a place to put them. And I think you could put them, make the buffer denser. I like the idea of having a little an open view to the patio, but I think we should use every tree we can. When I'm looking at this, around the pond, where the pond meets the road, or the open space, I think we can certainly put more trees in there.
And I will call out, I've reviewed the minutes for the last few times that both we and council have seen this, and the consensus through the minutes appears to be that more trees. Mr. Fishman, you actually called out a few times in Planning and Zoning Commission to maybe exchange some of the deciduous for fuller trees to obstruct some of the views into the personal property areas. So yeah. Continuing on with commission discussion, Mr. Supelak, do you want to go?
Well, can I jump in there real quick?
Well, why don't we go through commission? We'll turn it back over to you before we continue with questions. Mr. Supelak.
How about this? I'm generally with Warren on if our biggest hurdle at this point, right, we're well down a path. This is a very handsome, well thought out community. The amenity is great. Our biggest hurdle is the trees, and I happen to side with Warren in that we should find a spot for them. I don't know if right now, and the math gets a little bit funny, so I don't know right now if Chase, if part of the buffer is full of these caliper inches already, and we just have to relocate them out of there or not. I defer to everybody on that. If we're just not allowing all those tree caliper inches that are owed to end up there or not, but there's ample space to the point that landscaping can land them. I don't think we should give up on the trees. Everything else this is a delightful site. It's a lovely development. Really excited about it.
Thank you, Mr. Super. Ms. Kennedy.
Just briefly ditto. I'm in agreement that we should, as much as possible, maintain the tree requirement, and that was the reason for my line of questioning earlier to Mr. Ridge. Are there even places to put these trees? And which the answer was yes. So if there's a place to put the trees, and keeping trees is something that this commission traditionally pushes hard on. I'm in favor of as much as possible keeping that. But I do want to applaud the applicant also on the Overlook. I'm really impressed with that feature. So again, it's not all bad feedback. You've done some amazing things here, but that's where I stand.
Thank you, Ms. Kennedy. Mr. Crimes.
I don't have anything further that hadn't been already said.
Thank you, Mr. Grimes. Mr. Fishman?
I think Mrs. Fox has something to say.
I was just going to note that, and I'm looking at the landscape plan too. There seems to be not much barrier between, and someone correct me if I'm wrong, lot 23, 24, 25, and 26. Those back up to the school, don't they? Is that? Yeah, Glacier Ridge Elementary. I mean, honestly, if there's any place trees should go, it should be the boundary between the school and those homes on those back lots. So if we're looking for a place, that's quite an open area, and if there's any noise at all, it's going to come from that school. So I would definitely think that would be something the landscape plan should include. But I'm for listening to a commission and conversing with the commission on this discussion about the trees.
Thank you, Ms. Fox. Mr. Fishman, back to you.
Yeah, I agree with Ms. Fox, but I also, we had talked about before, as our doctor brought up, that we could replace evergreens with deciduous, and between the school and the houses is a perfect place to put evergreens, since school is in the winter time. Okay, and a 2.5 inch caliber pine tree is about 6 feet high, and 10 years it'll be 20 feet high. So I think that I definitely think we should use all the trees now. And I agree with Ms. Fox. That's a good place to put them. But I think that we have to be fair, and we have an ordinance that says you pay for trees you don't use. And I think that we should definitely use every tree we can on. As I said, this is it's a beautiful development, but it's pretty dense. These are 6 foot side yards, so it's a pretty dense development. So when we break it up with trees and surrounded by trees, I think it gives it that quaint look. And I think, as I said, you're right up against the school. So I think I would never vote to get rid of any trees. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fishman. And just for clarity, we're looking to not just the ordinance, but we're also looking to the development plan for what guides our discussion and our decisions. So just to call out there that it's not just the ordinance that we're looking to, but also the development plan that has been approved by not just us, but also City Council.
Right.
Mr. Schneer, do you want to go next?
Excuse me. I guess I'd like to hear a little more from the applicant at the appropriate time on the tree issue. I have this thought of quality over quantity. If we just want to keep to the metrics, I'm not certain that I absolutely agree that more trees are always better. I guess that's what I'm struck with, and I'm sort of being a little cynical on what the aesthetics versus the economics are. And I'd like to hear the applicant. If the applicant is motivated strictly by economics, which is appropriate, they want to sell a saleable product. I want to sort of parse that a little bit, tease that out. But if it's, look, if there's some reason why, other than economics, why the amount of trees or the caliper inches is inappropriate, I'd like to hear that as well. And I echo what Jane said. Can we get trees where we think there should be trees versus let's see how many trees we can get.
Yeah, I agree with that. By the way, we don't want to just throw them anywhere, but I think if you don't put them in, they're never there. So.
All right. So I just have one quick question also for staff before we move forward. So the planning report did say that the recommendation was to decrease the height of the 5'4" pillars to match Tartan Ridge, but do you know how tall those other pillars are? I didn't see anywhere in the text where it called out how tall those were. So are we shortening 4 inches or are we shortening 1.5 feet?
Typical pillars in Tartan Ridge are 48 inches in height.
All right. And then I do want to look to staff again for clarity. I did read in the development text and in the minutes from the previous meetings that the open space would be maintained by the HOA. Can you just add clarity what constitutes a HOA and therefore what constitutes open space under the agreement that would require HOA to take care of open space?
Yeah, so the master HOA, which a homeowner in the Overlook at Tartan would be required to join, is maintaining or is responsible for maintaining the majority of Reserve A, which is going to be, the larger kind of exterior of the site. The exception being the Overlook amenity and the path to the Overlook amenity. That is the responsibility of the sub-association, as are the hedgerows and pillars. So that is all going to be sub-association responsibility.
Thank you, Mr. Ridge. All right, so Ms. Fox.
I have a question for Thad. Thad, this might simplify things. If the text requires this number of trees, as was stated earlier by Nikki, is there any room here for discussion among the commission members?
So and I believe what Chase articulated earlier is correct, that there is a buffering requirement in the development plan, street tree requirement, and then there is the overall applicable tree replacement code. And so the question where there's some play in the joints is, are these replacement inches, are new trees that are going in the buffer countable toward those replacement inches? And I think that is something that the commission has the ability to discuss. There has to be these replacement inches on the property, but whether that is counted in the buffering area or not is an item for discussion.
Yeah, I guess that's where I feel like for us the rubber meets the road. If the text requires a certain number of trees within the buffer, a certain number of replacement trees and a certain number of street trees. We might be able to move them around, but it doesn't sound like we can change the number. That's what I'm feeling as if I'm hearing, or it sounds like I'm hearing from
Right.
staff. If that's the case, then we're spending a lot of time on numbers. Nikki?
Right. So the text of the development plan, excuse me, I just scrolled away from it. The text of the development plan
I guess I can provide some additional clarity while Thad navigates to that section. I believe what the applicant is requesting is to double count the trees. So basically the replacement trees would be allowed to be planted in the buffer. And I think what Thad is saying is that the commission has the latitude to make that determination. Staff is recommending a condition that no more than 1/3 of the required replacement inches be permitted to be double counted. And the way that staff came to the conclusion on 1/3 is based on other recent previously approved developments. One example along Highland Croy being Autumn Rose Woods. But ultimately, it would be up to the commission to decide.
So basically, you've made a concession here by allowing that. Staff has made a concession. A concession.
Correct.
Made.
I don't quite understand double counting. Do we get the same amount of trees or do we get half the trees?
So you would get less trees by using the interpretation that 1/3 of the replacement inches may be used to fulfill the planting requirement in the buffer. It wouldn't be substantially fewer trees, but it would allow the applicant some flexibility while still ensuring that this is consistent with other previously approved developments.
And for clarity, Nikki, correct me if I'm wrong, but that is the recommendation before us tonight, is the concession of 1/3 of that tree replacement be double counted, so to speak, in that buffer zone, but only up to 1/3.
That's correct. That's the staff's recommendation, and the commission may accept that or amend accordingly.
Thank you. All right, looking back, Mr. Schneer, go ahead.
Quick question, so I understand the applicant's point of view, at least at this point. Is the applicant is not okay with the staff's recommendation? They would like to see something different than that, or not, that whether we're agreeing to accept the staff's recommendation at this point, is the applicant willing to accept the staff's recommendation as a condition?
Mr. Smith.
Well, I think I'd like to respond to some other things, but I'll wait until you tell me that it's appropriate to do so. I have some questions on the language as it's written, and as Chase and Nicole kind of articulated it. In regards to that 1/3, is the staff saying that up to 1/3 of the trees that were required in the language of the text can be used for the buffer trees? Or is the staff saying that 1/3 of the trees planted in the buffer overall can count towards the tree replacement? Because we really have two separate issues, and I think we're kind of getting stuck in the middle of a circular firing squad here, because several of the commission members have asked us to plant additional replacement trees in the buffer, but staff's condition may be saying that those can't count towards replacement trees because they're in the buffer. And so we're going to get penalized twice, because then we still have to find other places to put replacement trees. So I'm a little bit confused. I think we would be open to the fact that if staff says, hey, we would be willing to accept that 1/3 of the trees that you have written in your text are applicable towards replacement trees. versus none of those would be applicable towards replacement trees, I think we're certainly open to that suggestion. I think if staff is saying all of these additional trees that you've now put in the buffer, only 1/3 of them can count towards replacement, then I think we just prefer to move them out of the buffer somewhere else. But I don't know that that's the commission's intent, because I tend to agree with Ms. Fox and others that the aesthetic is really what's important here, not the number. And I think we have a great number. We have a great aesthetic. We can certainly plant some additional trees between the between the homes and the school, and we'd be willing to do that. But if you look at that plan, it's hard to argue that you won't have enough trees aesthetically as you drive down McKittrick and as you drive down Highland Croy. It's going to be an extremely dense buffer. And so I guess I want to make sure first we're not getting hit twice.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. If we could have Nikki, if you could just provide clarity. I am understanding of the required replacement trees, 1/3 of those can be used in the buffer, but can you provide more granularity? Mr. Smith calls on, the trees that have been planted in the buffer. So is there some bucket of trees that has already been put into this parcel post start of application to now?
Mm-hmm. So the important thing to highlight here is that the applicant must fulfill the requirements of their development text. So they must fulfill the buffer requirements. And separately, there is a tree replacement.
So pause you right there. So there is a buffer requirement. What is called out in that buffer requirement, and what has already been done, and what is in this application yet to do? So if we could just handle these buckets at a time.
Mm-hmm. Thad, would you mind, do you have that pulled up?
I do have the buffer requirement. So the buffer requirement is specific in terms of the type of trees and the frequency at which they will be planted in the buffer area. 2 evergreen trees per 30 linear feet, 3 ornamental trees per 90 linear feet, 1 other deciduous tree per 45 linear feet planted in a naturalized manner. So that's going to get you a certain number of trees in a certain frequency along the buffer.
Do we have what's currently there calculated out in some sort of matrix to see, do they already meet that with what is currently in that buffer zone?
Gary, do you have those numbers?
I don't have it. Well, okay. So right now we have in the buffer area, we have 67 deciduous shade trees. We have 116 evergreen trees, and we have 60 ornamental trees. So of what's required in the buffer, we are over 95.5 inches on what's required over the text in deciduous trees. We are over by, I think, 22.5 inches on the evergreen trees, and we are over by approximately 42 inches on the ornamental trees. So we have more trees in the buffer than what is required by the text.
Okay, so Nikki, now if we could go to the next bucket. So the tree replacement, if we could go there next.
So based on that description, the applicant would be eligible to reduce the total number of buffer trees to those required by the development text. And then they are separately required to provide replacement inches. And the condition applied by staff states that 1/3 of those required replacement inches may be provided in the buffer.
Understood. So the tree replacement inches, what is in that bucket, the required tree replacement?
Is that 100 inches, Chase?
So that is the required replacement inches. I'm sorry, Gary, do you happen to have those numbers?
Your planning report says 626.
626.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so since we have 626 inches, 1/3 of 626 is roughly
9.
209. So right now we have 99 over, 22 over, and 42 over. So all 209 inches can be subtracted by my math, according to my understanding. All 209 inches can be subtracted. Well, we're not there yet, but if I look at 95 and a half, 22 and a half, and 42.
Yeah, I think the challenging thing in this context about doing the calculation is that the buffer requirement requires trees, not inches. And then the tree replacement requirement requires inches. So when we try to have this conversation, it doesn't quite line up.
But even if Mr. Smith has calculated out, so 626 inches is what's required in the tree replacement, is that correct?
That is what's required by code, yes.
So if I have 626 inches that's required, and I have an overage of a total of 160 in the buffer, then I can't use all 209 that 1/3 could credit me. I could only use 160 because I'm only positive 160 inches in the buffer zone. But I can use that 160. I can use that 160 inches as part of my tree replacement, thus reducing that to 49. Is that a correct understanding?
I believe that's a correct statement. I can't.
This is not the math.
Yeah.
Of course, this is not the math. I'm just talking principles.
Yes.
So, Mr. Smith, was that your understanding of what the language was with the up to 1/3 credit?
Well, the way that it's written to me, in the way that it sounds that Nicole has described it, is so we can't use any of the buffer trees we can't use any of the trees required by the buffer to account for replacement trees. So I think what the language is saying is that we no more than 1/3 of the trees that are required for replacement can be placed in the buffer. So essentially what it's saying is there's only a certain number of trees that we're going to allow you to put in the buffer and count for replacement trees, which means we got to find someplace else to put all those replacement trees because we can't use them in the buffer. I think it's more of a limitation than a concession, I guess is what I'm saying.
So your interpretation is incorrect.
Okay.
This is a concession.
I'm glad to hear that.
This is a concession. So like I said, we're having trouble lining up the trees with the inches.
Yeah.
But once you would know so you have a finite number of trees that you're required in the buffer, and eventually those trees, usually new trees would be 2.5 inches in diameter. So the number of trees would equate to a number of inches. And of those, of the total replacement inches, you may credit those against your buffer requirement. So it is a concession. I mean,
Nikki,
is it fair to
Rebecca,
say, Nikki? Sorry.
Yeah. I was just going to say, Nikki, just so we can all use the same math as Rebecca's trying to say, what you originally pointed out is staff believes we are 200 inches shy of meeting the requirement, which approximates down to 100 trees. That's really the final number that we're talking about. Is that correct, Nikki?
Yeah, it would actually be 80 trees.
So we're talking about 80 trees that staff is saying we are missing. And of those 80 trees, they're saying 1/3 of those can go in the buffer and be counted towards that. So now we're down to 67 trees because you just took 1/3 of, I don't even know, 88 divided by 3 is 29. Take those 29 trees off. We're down to 59 trees that we owe you, roughly. Is that correct, Nikki? Rough math. I'll give you 5 or 10 trees on either side. We owe you 60 trees. So that's really, Rebecca, when you're asking coming down to it, that's what we're looking at. We're down to 60 more trees. When we're planting, Gary, correct me, when we are planting on this 24-acre site, around 700 trees?
A total of 570.
So 570 trees on 24 acres. Warren, for you, because I know you like that, we're planting 24 trees per acre on this site. That's a lot of trees. That's a lot of trees.
It's a dense site, though. the compromise could be is just take those 59 trees and put them wherever you feel is appropriate on the site. Anyway,
I
okay.
think what we got caught up in is last time we were here in front of you at P&Z for the preliminary development plan approval, Warren made the comment that he wanted a denser buffer. So that's what we've written into the text.
Right.
There was never, we want a denser buffer, and by the way, you owe us street trees, and by the way, you owe us replacement trees. That was our fault for not saying, wait, can we get a clarification on what we're asking? So when we came back and submitted this final development plan, which Gary drew a great plan, I think, part of that, we submitted a plan that we believe met everything, because we were trying to say there's no more tree, that we have no more space left. But when we did hand it in, then staff came back to us and said, hey, you guys haven't met your tree replacement. That's the first time when this came up out of all this discussion, because my response would have been to Warren back in preliminary development tree when he asked for more trees in that buffer. I would have automatically said, are my replacement trees being counted? You would go through the minutes of that preliminary development plan. There was no one word of tree replacement waiver fees or anything. They weren't mentioned. So that's our fault for not knowing code. But we are putting 570 trees on the site.
I think the compromise is put those, if you want, we can allow you to put those extra 50 trees in the buffer zone. There's places between the
we're already placing hundreds of trees, and you're asking us, he's spending so Romanelli's spending $300,000 on trees, and you're saying just put another 50 trees in, put another 60 grand in. Why not put another 100?
I just think you should require whatever the math figures out to the required amount of trees, put them in. Okay.
It's a technicality and it's a miss. It's not required. We can go back to go through the math in the minutes. It's not spelled out and it's not clarified. That's what we're saying. We are being beat on a technicality for you to get another 50 trees, which is costing this developer another $60,000.
Now, for clarification, it is the development text that was approved by Planning and Zoning Commission, forwarded to council, and adopted there. So there were multiple opportunities. That's not to say that everybody can read exactly the same paragraph and understand the exact same logic.
But this is the first time tree replacements come up. Our staff report is the very first time tree replacements come up.
Yes,
it's the first time that it's come up.
Understood, but tree replacement is part of just the general building.
Shame on us for not knowing the code, and shame on staff for not bringing the code up. Who's to blame? And that's what we're saying. We're giving you a huge amount of trees, over, in our opinion, over treeing the site. But yet you guys are asking for more. So what I'd like to ask Thad then, that if we approve this, can we approve a condition that we'll move forward, but we're bringing back a tree waiver request to council? Because I want Mr. Romanelli, who's done amazing things for the city, amazing things. I want him to have legal ability to come back and fight this, because I do not believe the tree replacement clause in the city of Dublin is legal in anything if anybody presses it. So I want him to have the ability, and I'll pay for it, to press it, because I think what you're doing to him is so wrong. It doesn't sit anywhere. It's unjust to him what he's being asked. And yeah, I'm complaining over another $50,000 or whatever, and he's doing all this. But we bent over backwards when we approved this site. All the things you guys asked us, Warren, on the driveways, on the architecture.
And Mr. Colley, I understand. Dublin is not the bend over backward kind of city. We never
we bent over backwards, Rebecca. We did.
I think
we are not.
I think we compromised in other areas. How many lots do we have here now?
52.
And we're doing minimum setbacks, minimum 6 foot side setbacks.
How many lots do we have total? Is it 30?
56 lots.
56 lots. I think that originally that we were going to have less lots, and we gave you the lot on the corner, and I agree. We compromised. So I think that.
So my question is back to Thad then. Do we have any standing to have that condition met so that we have some legal liability if we choose to come back?
I think
I'm not asking you, Warren. I'm asking Thad, please.
I think Thad should answer that question.
That's what I asked him. Thad, please answer the question when you have a moment.
So your question is, if the commission approves the final development plan with this condition, what is your recourse?
Yes. Can we ask for an additional, or do we have the right to come back and fight at a tree waiver requested after you've approved it? Or if not, can we add a condition that we're approving it as you guys have said, and that we have the right to apply for a tree waiver and come back and fight this fight another day?
Well, by the rules of the Planning and Zoning Commission, when conditions are applied, they request the agreement of the applicant. And so if the applicant doesn't agree to that condition, then, that condition's not in there. But then the question is, does the commission apply, or does the commission approve the final development plan not having that condition? So that's the trade-off.
No,
in terms of
I
how
said
these
you can
conditions
approve it with your conditions as written, as Nikki has written it. We'll agree to those conditions as she's written it. We'll say we agree to those. I want a third. I'm not sure how many conditions there are. I want another condition added that states that the applicant may come back with a tree waiver request. So we're agreeing to you because we want to get out of here tonight and not waste anybody's time, because we're talking about 67 trees at the end of the day is what we're talking, or whatever we're doing. But we would like to take this back to Vince Romanelli and say, listen, this is what happened. We got it approved, but you have the right to go back for something. What I don't want to do is take his right completely off the table.
Now, do we even have an avenue for, coming back for tree waiver?
Yes.
And if so, what body would that be to?
City council, if I'm right.
I don't think it's a good idea.
Agreed.
I think we should come to a compromise and approve it and be done with it. And I think staff and Thad should work that out.
Nikki?
Yeah, and I think maybe Thad and I can speak a little bit more to the process. So a tree waiver process is not under the purview of the Planning and Zoning Commission, and to apply a condition to that effect is not necessary. The applicant is entitled to that process should they choose to pursue it, and that would be forwarded to City Council for their determination. There are specific site considerations that make a site eligible. Typically, heavily wooded sites are considered eligible and would more easily be able to meet the review criteria. So if the applicant feels comfortable and is in agreement with the conditions on the final development plan tonight, you could approve that, and they could subsequently pursue other recourse.
That's really all I want to make sure that if we approve.
Do you have the section of code that we could reference?
I know the tree replacement.
It's a resolution.
Okay. All right. So in the interest of fulfilling the applicant's request, well, Mr. Supelak, go ahead.
Nicole, forgive me. Just one more clarification. Outside of this PUD, right? Outside of these rules that were written this way, in a standard city parcel, standard city zoning code, do any of the trees, buffer or interior lot trees, do any of those trees qualify as replacement caliper inches? Typically?
No.
Okay. Got it. Thank you.
Mr. Smith, did you have a comment?
Well, I did. I just a question. I guess back into the spirit of collaboration. I'll let Kevin express the outrage, but I do have some thoughts, though. Just a couple more things because I think they are important as we work these out. There was a request on the table. I think Warren, maybe another person, that they wanted to see additional evergreens, and that was also part of Warren's request when we went through the preliminary plan requirements. But part of, again, the trap that we get into is that evergreens and ornamental trees are only allowed to provide a certain percentage of the tree replacement requirements. And I think we're probably at that limit already. So if we're going to compromise on the trees and the commission wants additional evergreens, we have no problem with that. We just want to make sure that they can count, that those evergreens can count towards the replacement requirements. Because right now, I think we're at our limit. And so we would, I guess, get stuck again with not potentially being able to fulfill those requirements.
And I think part of, and Mr. Fishman, I'll let you add some clarity here in just a moment, but I think part of the request was the placement of the evergreens, not necessarily the count of evergreens. Using those strategically to screen the areas where we would prefer screening next to private residences, that sort of thing, and
Right.
not in view spaces. So
Right.
the distribution of evergreens, not necessarily the count of evergreens. We can make requests, and if you'll notice, you actually highlighted one that this is the contrast to the development text that we were just discussing earlier. The development text, that requirement, and Nikki and staff's concession with the 1/3 trees that can be repurposed in the buffer zone. So the reason for the concession is because of the development language that was adopted and agreed to. This request of evergreens is just that. It's a request, not a requirement.
Understood. We have no problem, I think, with the request. I mean, obviously, the concern is over the additional number of trees, and there's still more conversation to be had on that. But I mean, if we are going to provide additional number of trees, we're happy to meet the request of additional evergreens, say behind the houses, between the school, if that's the commission's, desire. But at the same time, I also want those to be able to count towards the replacement requirements. Because we would be providing those additional trees in that case. Otherwise, if there's a percentage issue and we're just stuck with the inches and meeting the requirements that no more than a certain percentage, then we're going to be in a position of saying, okay, well, then we're going to have to put some more deciduous trees in the buffer, take some evergreen trees out of the buffer and move them over in this location. And I'm not sure that's what the commission wants either. So I'm just trying to make sure that my job at the end of the day is making sure whatever numbers you guys decide on, I can meet those adequately, and take care of that and not put the staff in a position. They say, well, okay, they asked for these evergreen trees, but you can't really count those towards your replacement either. So, now you've got to provide some additional trees. I don't think that's the commission's intent.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Ms. Fox?
I think it's important that we do think about intent here. I definitely don't think we should require more trees because we want more evergreens that's outside of what's already required. It seems to me that if we said that 1/3 of the trees that are replacement can be, I think the wording is placed in the buffer, and I think what we're really saying is replaced. In other words, count towards. Your replacement can be used in the buffer, 1/3 counts. That's the concession Nikki is saying. I think it's important that we don't tie your hands to the point that we don't have a good aesthetic along the streetscape just to plug in evergreen trees where we may not need them. These percentages are there to make sure that we have screening where screening is needed, but not overscreen to the point that you have a wall of evergreens and not an aesthetic streetscape. I think this is something you work with staff on. I'd certainly be lenient about allowing the kinds of trees, working with our landscape architect to be sure that we achieve the aesthetic along Highland Road that is the best, not necessarily that we have a wall of evergreen trees. Do you know what I'm saying? I think that's, to me, the intent is important.
I do, but Ms. Fox, I think we're actually there. I don't know, Chase, if you can bring up the plan again, because I think the plan really is important to this. Right now, we're just talking conceptually. It may be easier if we look at it and say, hey, here's some space we can put in some additional trees. I think.
And while Chase,
go ahead, Nikki.
While Chase pulls up that plan for everyone's consideration, I do want to perhaps offer a solution to this discussion, which would be that this application be tabled and it returned to the Planning and Zoning Commission.
I believe that the applicant does not seek a tabling right now, but rather the motion itself moving forward with the understanding that there is recourse, that there is an avenue for him to pursue the tree waiver in addition to the motion and.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I guess what I'm offering is a different recourse, which would be that if the applicant were to table, which would mean they would not make a motion on this case tonight, which means this case would not be closed. So if the applicant were to table, they could bring this case back before the commission with some additional clarity on tree numbers, but also with a text modification to clarify the development text, because it sounds like there's, quite a bit of ambiguity about what the intent was. And I think perhaps that is the cleanest option, while maybe not the most swift option. So it doesn't result in anyone. Yeah.
Mr. McCauley, Mr. Smith, then looking to you, if you have a preference between moving forward with a motion this evening or a request to table this evening, understanding that in either case, you would have a next step.
Nicole, with the, when you say text modification, are you implying that we could amend our development text, our zoning text, to incorporate wording that maybe met more of the original intent? And would then that not have to go back to council for final approval before we could get this development plan approved?
Mm-hmm. Yes. So they're called minor text modifications. They do have to be minor in nature, and a minor text modification cannot write a tree waiver into your development text. So it would really only be resolving the issue at hand tonight, but may provide everyone some greater clarity as to both the meaning and the raw numbers in terms of inches, trees, and dollars, because in my assessment, we are kind of passing each other in the dark on this tonight.
So with that, what you're saying is essentially we wouldn't necessarily be able to change the outcome. We would just be making the outcome more clear. I think your interpretation is based on what we have written in the text. If we can't change what we have written in the text, I guess I don't understand how that's going to change the interpretation. I don't understand the advantage of doing that for the applicant. It would be one thing if we would go back and say, be able to add to the text that 1/3 of the trees in this buffer could count towards tree replacement, but it doesn't sound like we would be allowed to do that, because that would be modifying the
and I mean that's really a value judgment that you as the applicant or the applicant's representative need to make. Unfortunately, we can't negotiate an application on the floor of a public meeting.
Sure, I understand. I guess I'm just trying to understand the mechanics of it and what we would or would not be allowed to do. If we can't go back in and reduce the buffer requirements or add language to say, that some of the buffer plantings can be counted towards tree replacement, which I think Kevin was stating, and which is correct, which was our original intent. We did not write it into the language. Shame on us. So if we can't go back and correct that piece of it, I don't know what we could change in the language that would make a difference to the conversation that we have. Because I think your interpretation is that we owe you an additional 200 inches of trees. And I think what we're trying to do is seek some relief for that. I don't know if we're going to be able to make a modification to the text that actually accomplishes that.
And Nikki, just one point of clarification. We have two motions that we are looking for this evening, one of which is to recommend the approval of the final plat to City Council. If the application were tabled tonight, that requirement doesn't go away, so they'd still need to go to City Council. Is that correct?
So,
go ahead, Thad.
Well, I was just going to say, as I look at the code provision that deals with minor text amendments, I think that we would really just need to see what exactly is proposed. And I understand the applicant's challenge of, not wanting to delay this unnecessarily. But the fact is, we're talking on the one hand about an absolute number of trees in the buffering requirement versus caliper inches in the tree replacement requirement. I don't think it is impossible for us to, once we are all talking about the same thing, what are the caliper inches in the absolute number of trees on your buffer versus the caliper inches in your replacement requirement. I don't think it's impossible for us to put together a text amendment that would fit that minor criteria that Planning and Zoning Commission could approve without going back to council. I don't think we're going to do it sitting here on Zoom or on WebEx this evening.
Well, I could clarify that a little bit, because we already have done that math. That math is done, and it was provided in our response to staff, in our response to the comments. And so we do know the number of inches that are required by the buffer, and we do know the number of inches that we've provided by the buffer. And that's essentially how we've arrived at that determination that there's a 200-inch deficit between staff's interpretation and our interpretation. So I think those numbers are clear, and the numbers we're talking about essentially are 200 inches. I don't know that we're going to be able to revise the language in a way that makes a substantial difference in that. So I guess what I'm getting at is, if there is some advantage to us making changes in that, can we somehow affect that number through whatever language we would amend in the text? Then I could look at the applicant, I could look at Jim, and I could look at Kevin and say, okay, is the time worth the number of trees? But if what you're telling me is true, what I think is probably true, for a minor amendment, if we can't really rewrite something that has a substantial effect on, the overall look and feel of the development, then I'm not sure we're going to get anywhere by delay. And I just don't know if I would ask my client to delay based on an uncertain result. Chase, did you manage to find a plan yet? Because I do still think that is important to the conversation.
Yeah, give me one moment.
Gary, can you also help maybe shed light on what your response was? When you say we're 200 trees.
200 inches.
200 inches. In discrepancy between how staff calculated and how we calculated. I don't need a huge lesson. I'm just trying to say, where did we not apply the 200 inches that they did? Like, what was the opinion or whatever?
Well, I can actually share my screen if you'll allow. If you want, I can show you the response.
What's the opinion difference?
Now, I do think that there have been a couple of important points made that, this evening that meets all requirements and allows us to move forward with what the applicant's seeking tonight. So we do have a couple of different avenues. We can go the tabling and bringing back with a minor text modification. We can go with a motion with presumably the staff recommending conditions to move along, and you then have the ability to come back with a tree waiver request. But we would then look to you to see what would your preferred route be, because I think that we can present screens and we can do napkin math. I think that that's going to change the outcome of what we're going to do this evening.
Right. I don't think we have any intent of delaying this any further. Unfortunately, it's gone on for some time. And if we were to delay this and miss another month or two, there's a high chance that we would miss the season because of the time it would take to get our engineering plans out of engineering department and then start. And so we're talking the entire season for 50 trees. So that's a big miss. So we have to move forward with something.
Mr. Smith, any additions to that?
No, I don't think so. I think I just want to get back to Ms. Fox's point, and talking about the buffer and I guess the wisdom of trying to pack some additional trees in there, or how we would look at that, or even the concern over a continuous wall of evergreens. Because I think essentially that's where we are now. So we can
And I
show
think
that
that
plan.
And I think that that can all be encompassed in that tree waiver aspect. So all of that, that's contextual. So it's based on, you're requesting a tree waiver because this condition, that condition, and this other condition, and there was ambiguity from your perspective in the development text. I think that that's the platform for that tree waiver avenue.
Well, and I think that's true, but there were several points raised this evening, I think, that need to be solved in the event that we don't get that tree waiver. Because I think that there's some conflicting desire among the board. And I think that bears discussions because the board's going to rule tonight one way or the other, and we may be bound by that. So I wanted to make sure we had the opportunity to get the board to a final decision so that we can move forward.
Understood. So Nikki?
And so just to clarify, even if a decision is made tonight, there are a multitude of avenues to continue this discussion. Some of them cost more money, some of them take more time, but in addition to taking a vote and closing this application tonight, nothing would preclude the applicant from paying a new fee for a new amended final development plan in August and requesting a minor text modification at that time. Because obviously no trees would be planted until the fall at the earliest. So in addition to tabling for a minor text modification, voting and bringing back an amended final development plan modification, or voting and going to council for a tree waiver, I think there are plenty of opportunities here.
Now, for clarity, you're not suggesting that the project be put on hold until August. You're suggesting that we pass tonight, they move forward with the application, and then later on in the process, they come back for the tree waiver.
So I'm suggesting that they open a new final development plan application, an amended final development plan, which they would have to pay for, which may not be what the developer wants to do. But if they paid for it, they could do the minor text modification in August, having obtained a decision this evening so that they could proceed to engineering.
Could we start with development?
If you go to council with your final plat and plat your plat.
But then can we still make that change? So let's say we start development and we start dirt breaking ground in June.
Yeah.
And we file the plats approved, all that, then we come back to you and still in August, we still can make that amendment change and try.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
But you have a chance.
It would be before you plant trees. You could do everything else.
Right. No, I get that. Yeah. Okay. So, Nikki, maybe you can help because I don't know that and I'll be brief, I promise. On, like I said, on the discrepancy of the 200, where do you see whose calculation? Where did we go wrong on our calculation?
Yeah. And honestly, I wish I had a good answer for you, but I don't think I have an answer tonight. I'd really like to sit down around a table when we've all had a good night of sleep and look at some fresh numbers. And I think that we can come to some consensus here.
So I think Rebecca, that's sorry to interrupt you real quick, Nikki, but that's where we are off is I don't think we all know, everybody on this board, we were coming to you with the hope of saying, hey, staff calculated it wrong. We don't owe you the 200 inches or the 100 trees or now the 50 trees. But we have never been able to prove that to you because we don't know how they calculated it to be, and they don't know how we calculate it. So we have two different calculations out there that just have two different results. And so by their calculation, they said we're wrong. Staff report they have the ability to do that. This was our only chance to fight and say, no, we don't. But unfortunately, again, Gary, maybe it failed on us to say, well, no, staff calculated it wrong because of this. Our only thing was we added a bunch of trees in the buffer because Warren asked us to, and then wrote that in the text. And unfortunately, then we were unable to use any of those in the tree replacement, and shame on us. So I think we were coming to plead to you to say, we made a mistake. We messed up. We've done something wrong here, so help us out. Nikki said, hey, I'll throw you a bone. I'll give you a third of the trees to use in it. Can we get half and get out of here? I mean, that's literally what I'm down to.
I think that you're exactly right. I think that what we both want is a beautiful development for the city, okay, and the residents that live there. We also know from experience that when you back up to a school, the people that buy those houses are never thrilled with being even though they buy the lot. I mean, we've done this development after development. They buy the lot, and then they come in here and they say, "Oh my gosh!" They said they screen it, and I look out my window, and kids are throwing balls, and the lights are on. So I mean, we hear that over and over again. Okay, and so I think what we should do is, I think it's a good suggestion. I think we should finalize this and come to an agreement and say, how about 50% of those trees?
So I would like to then turn it over to the commission to see, is there appetite for reducing increasing the percentage that can be qualified for the tree replacement in the buffer zone?
That's what I was just going to say. Okay, to put them in the buffer between the school.
Okay, I can count to 4. I have 4.
And maybe not make you do 50 trees, but do 25 extra or something, because I think it's beneficial for everybody.
Or 25 between the houses and the elementary, and we'll call it a day.
Yeah, see, that's why. And then the deal's done, and it's a beautiful development, and it'll be their problem when the people scream and say, "I can see between the trees," and you know.
Now there was a call out from Mr. Smith earlier that there was more discussion other than just the count of trees. Mr. Smith, does that discussion cover items that you wanted clarity on?
Not exactly. I still want to go back to the plan. We've
Chase,
kept dancing around that, but
Chase, can you present the plan?
Behind the school, Gary, can be evergreens. If they just make that a condition, you can plant.
Well, certainly, I think, and I think that's one way to solve, because I think this is important. I mean, I don't know if there's a way to zoom in on that a little bit. So I think when you look at this and kind of back, Ms. Fox, to what you said, we are right now at a pretty consistent wall of evergreens along that buffer, plus a whole bunch of other trees. And so, we could certainly add a few trees in some of these spaces back here, but it's to no additional benefit. Really to anybody. It doesn't change the view from the backs of the houses. It doesn't change the view from McKittrick Road or Highland Croy Road. I think Kevin's suggestion is a good one. Maybe, can we, and I think there was some discussion about opening up these views. We would certainly be fine with that. Can we shift some of these trees around, maybe move those into places where you feel there's a gap in the buffer? Can we plant some additional trees here in behind those homes to screen them from the school and call it good? To use those as use the trees in here as meeting whatever they are, whether they're evergreen trees, whatever the staff would like to see us put back there. Right. Can we use those towards the buffer requirement, move these trees around, and maybe get an agreement from the board that makes a lot of sense?
So I'll go first, and then I'll look at the appetite of the commission. I am comfortable with the concession of the 50% over the 30%. If there is additional request on top of that, that leaves me uncomfortable. And so I trust our landscape architects. I trust staff to make sure that the requirements that have been passed by both commission and council by way of ordinances and development text, I trust them to enforce those and not provide a bad product, not trees for the sake of trees, but rather trees that benefit the individual community, the individual homeowners, and the community at large. If there is an additional request that the 50% concession is not what the applicant is looking for tonight, then I back away from the yes.
Rebecca, would you allow the 50% though, as Gary's saying, not to get in conflict with evergreen or deciduous trees, to allow us, we did the 50%, now the other 50%, I can use, as Warren is suggesting, evergreens behind those lots, but that would back to the school, because those are the evergreens are going to benefit the best. But we've already used our quantity allowable evergreens in the.
Now, have you used your quantity of allowable evergreens in the bucket from which staff is calculating?
Right, we've done that. We will exceed that in the mounding area, so we won't be allowed to use evergreens anywhere else. And we don't want to pull evergreens out of the mounding, because then that opens it up too much for Warren.
So then, Nikki, I'm going to go back to you and ask for clarity. Help us understand, in an application such as this, when we're requiring a significant number, we're looking at what, 67 deciduous, 116 evergreen. Already I'm twice as many evergreen as I am deciduous, understanding that there's ornamental on top of that.
Right.
So it's about a 50-50. If I add the deciduous and the ornamental together, it's about a 50-50 split between evergreen and deciduous trees. So is there logic, is there reasoning, is there a purpose statement in when the code or development text suggested or accepted has that distribution? Is there some purpose statement that surrounds the use of the types of trees, or is it just for variety?
So it's really based on the historic implementation of tree preservation. So there is not a finite number identified in the code. That being said, I can tell you that all of the developments we've recently approved have no more than 50% evergreens. And usually those are strategically placed to provide buffering or to provide screening and the like.
So in this, where we're talking specifically along that school run, I would feel comfortable discussing percentages or counts or however we want to do that as a commission, because it is unique. It's backing up to a school property that in and of itself provides a different challenge than houses backing up to houses.
Right.
I am a little uncomfortable going into the, hey, we're writing text now rather than looking for amendments to conditions. But I'd look to the commission to see what the appetite is for, in addition to changing the language of the staff recommendation from 1/3 to 1/2. In addition to that, calling out specifically those lots, and Jane, I believe it was 23 through 26 that you called out earlier. So pertaining just to 23 to 26, that the applicant work with staff on the distribution of deciduous, ornamental, and evergreen trees, allowing the applicant to work with staff on the distribution. I have our thumb up, 2, 3, 4. Okay, that looks good. So Nikki, Chase, can one of you start with magic fingers on a screen while we kind of touch base and see if there are any other items that we need to cover before moving forward this evening? So Mr. Smith, looking back to you with the consideration on the, consideration on the 1/3 versus the 50%, and on direction to have staff work with you to allow a little bit more flexibility in the use of evergreens rather than deciduous and ornamental along lots 23 through 26 that abut the school property. Are those items that you're seeking clarity on this evening? Have I covered anything, everything? Have I missed anything?
I think that covers it. I think it does.
Okay.
One last question for the view areas. Is there any language that you are requesting on view area when it comes to landscaping on top of what's recommended?
When you say the view area, do you mean the view into the overlook that the staff is requesting?
Correct.
No, I don't. I'm very comfortable that we can work with staff to come up with a solution that makes everybody happy. I mean, we've had a very good working relationship with them at this point, and I think I have an understanding of what they're looking for. So we'll figure that out.
Thank you. Nikki?
Yeah, I think we need to add just one more condition this evening to reflect that the applicant will work with staff to redistribute the evergreen, deciduous, and ornamental trees behind lots X as identified by the commission.
And I would stay away from redistribute because we do want them we do want to allow the flexibility to substitute evergreen for deciduous and ornamental. So I don't want to be strict with the distribution meaning, because that has two meanings. It has distribution numerically and it has distribution as placement. And so I want to add a little bit more clarity to the applicant work with staff to align on count of deciduous, ornamental, and evergreen trees
Are
abutting
you
lots
looking more for
23
like
through 26?
proportion instead of?
Flexibility on percentages would be maybe it. Flexibility on percentages of evergreens. I think they should be able to not be adhering so closely to this, certainly not way off the mark, but certainly some flexibility on of the ability to use evergreens where needed, even if the percentages aren't exact.
So just so I have some clarity and both Chase and myself are able to administer this on the back end, would you say evergreen trees not to exceed 60%? Because we really do need some sort of stop in the sand.
So I wouldn't give a hard stop, because it could be that one interior lot you are doing, closer to 80, but transitions into deciduous and ornamental because of the lot alignment and the build footprint. So I don't want to be so restrictive that it is everybody has to be the same, because everybody is not the same. But
Right.
I do want to allow that flexibility. We're not looking at 100% evergreen, and we're not looking at just the whatever it is right now, 33% or 50% or whatever it is right now. Just that fluidity and flexibility to allow our staff, who we trust very well, and their landscape architect to understand what the purpose is. The purpose is to allow screening between the school and those particular homes, and the builder some flexibility in the count other than what's called out in the development text.
Okay, so when I refer to the percentage, I refer to the entire development, not on a lot by lot basis. So there is inherently that flexibility, I guess.
Right. I have a couple questions. Okay, it's getting confusing to me here. Okay, are they getting the same amount of? Are we getting extra trees or the same amount of trees?
They're able to double count more trees.
More trees. So we're getting less trees.
They're able to double count more trees, which means that the count of trees is going down slightly, but to a better end product due to the distribution of those trees. And that is a concession from the commission this evening.
So Warren, you're still getting more trees than we started tonight, though.
Okay. And one thing is, we talk about pine trees. We don't want any white pines, okay, because they thin out immediately. So we
Agreed.
Exclude white pines, no white pines. Okay, so we are getting at least the amount of trees we started out with, but more.
Yes.
Correct.
Yes.
And you're getting more evergreen trees.
Yeah,
in
more
those strategic
we're
locations.
getting more trunks in the ground.
Yes.
Okay.
That's. I certainly think the intent would be. I don't know how you write it. Like you said, it's a little confusing. That the mound as we have it, the buffer stays at the count we have it, and basically just the additional trees that we're planting behind those lots can all be evergreens, for example.
Okay.
That's the intent.
Okay.
And then the remainder of the
Can you write that?
be whatever.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because
So exactly what Kevin just said. If you can write that, Chase.
I think we all want the same thing. We want a beautiful development, and we don't want people to the two places that have to be screened are the school and of course the road to grow.
So can we just call out, since the concern is the evergreens, the applicant to work with staff to increase the count of evergreens, the percentage of evergreens adjacent to lots 23 through 26.
Okay, and we can approve it tonight, and they can go ahead with their development.
Correct.
Right.
Mr. Smith, Mr. McCauley, looking to you with the conditions as they are written.
I apologize, Ms. Call. I did not hear the last part of your recommendation.
Adjacent to lots 23, adjacent to or interior to lots 23 through 26.
And can you reference that those will be counted towards the the remaining tree replacement numbers, right? Because these trees count to that other 50%. Is that correct, all?
We don't want to get less trunks in the ground.
No, you're not. I'm saying I owe you 50% of the trees. I'm just saying for the tree replacement, these trees go towards that tree
So
replacement.
Nikki, just a clarification question on tree replacement. If they were to add trees on lots or adjacent to lots 23, 26 with no additional clarity in the conditions, would those trees count?
So typically the total number of replacement trees, fewer than 50% may be evergreens. So say they can add as many evergreens in this section of the site and they can count toward tree replacement. But if for some reason these new evergreens tip the scale to 51%, some of the evergreens elsewhere on the site would need to be subbed out for deciduous trees.
And we do not want to apply that specific condition. That's my understanding from the commission this evening. Is that correct?
It's not correct the way I look at it. I thought that's the reason we were increasing the percentage, is we're saying that they're bound by this 50%. We're asking for more evergreens, as Gary said, and he's going to get stuck. He's going to need to put evergreens in, and they're going to say, well, I'm at 50%, now I can't. Now we've got to take evergreens away somewhere.
Yep, that was my understanding as well.
Yeah, I thought we were giving him
subjected.
The flexibility to increase that 50% in order to add them over to lots 23 through 26.
Since it's on a lot by lot basis, I don't know how we call out that the evergreens, the additional evergreens on or adjacent to lots 23, 26 do not qualify for your, to use your term, tipping the scale.
Gary, how far off are you?
So, okay. I'm sorry, guys. I know you're all tired. I'm really sorry.
Oh, we're going to do this right. We're going to do it right. Don't worry.
No, there's a couple of things that I wanted to bring up that I think are really important. And I just got an email from one of my coworkers here, one of my employees. For one, we initially had some trees back there. We actually were asked to remove those trees from the final development plan by staff for two reasons. Number one, on-lot trees, according to what staff told us, are not allowed to be used for tree replacement. And since those trees would be on the lots, they would not have counted towards the tree replacements. We're happy to put them back there, but there's a second issue. There is a storm easement back there. And so we're going to have to work with engineering to make sure that we can put them back there. If we can get them back there, we have no problem putting them back there, but we would like staff to understand that those do count towards the tree replacement.
Right.
On the percentage issue, just so I can clarify, so everybody, because I think Nicole is talking about overall percentages. I want to talk just about tree replacements, because I think that's where we're getting stuck. And that's where I was getting stuck as a designer, trying to parse this out. Of the 600 and some inches that were required for tree replacements, what staff has told us is, and I don't know the exact numbers, I apologize, but only a certain percentage of those inches can be evergreen trees and ornamental trees. And I think it's a pretty low percent. I think it's like 20%. Or something like that, or maybe 30%, I don't know. But only 30% of those replacement trees can be evergreen or ornamental. The rest have to be deciduous. And what I'm saying is, I'm not talking about the overall balance, because there's other code requirements that require evergreens. Those aren't an issue. But we're over on the evergreens from what those code requirements are. And we're already using our 13% or 30% or whatever it is of evergreens to apply. So if we put more evergreens in, then we're going to be violating the terms of what staff told us before about the replacement trees, not about the overall site, but about the replacement trees. There's a certain percentage that staff will only allow to be replacement trees and evergreen or ornamental. So I guess my point in bringing that up is the overall balance needs to be what it is to make the site look right and accomplish the objectives. And I think that's what we're all after. But I don't want to be in a position where now we've exceeded the number of evergreens that are just in staff's interpretation to be allowed for replacement trees. So I just want whatever new evergreens we plant in addition to what's on the site today, I want those evergreens to be able to count as replacement trees. So we don't get double stuck, I guess, or double disadvantaged. Maybe that is a more fair or an easier way to put it in language, is that whatever additional evergreens are added to the site for screening purposes over and above what's on the plan today can be counted towards the tree replacement requirements.
But Nikki, if you were to propose language, what would that particular request look like?
I mean, if I'm being fully transparent, I am really struggling to keep up here.
And I would agree with that. It sounds like we've gone 3 different avenues, all on trees.
Yes.
Trying to force round peg in square hole this evening, and we're paying for it.
Nikki, as Gary suggested, to just simply state that the additional trees to be planted above and beyond the plan submitted can be evergreens. That's
count towards the tree replacement.
And count towards the tree replacement. That's because you know where we're going to do. You're requiring trees behind this school. We're going to plant 25 trees or 20 trees behind the school there, and those are going to be evergreens. That's simply what we're asking. And then we owe you another 20 trees or so. And those trees we're going to go plant somewhere else. And we've already exceeded your evergreen requirement elsewhere. So we've got to go find, Gary, you've got to go find some other ornamentals or something like that throughout the site.
Well, for whatever trees, the remainder of the site, we can work with staff. We have no issue with it. I mean, if staff wants them all to be evergreens, we have no problem with that. If that's, because I agree with you. I mean, staff and the landscape architect, we just want to make sure that whatever new trees we plant from today on, they count towards the replacement requirements, whether they be evergreen, ornamental, or deciduous.
And the call out, I think right now, is the more we draft from the dais, so to speak, we're not going to get the best product that we would otherwise get if it's in a planning room going through and saying, okay, let's prove this out. Yeah. Staff takes it away, does their calculations, you take it away and do their calculations. We are really, really trying to work here tonight so that you can continue on.
Yes.
But as the requests continue to come in, we get more and more uncomfortable and shy away.
I think
so. Right now we have conditions that are on the slides right now that allow for the increase from 30% to 50%.
Yes.
And give you flexibility with the evergreens adjacent to lots 23 through 26.
I think the only thing, and I would agree with Rebecca, I'm trying to make it as simple as I can, is to that number 6 is to just say that working towards or counting towards the replacement, these will count towards the replacement trees. Because that's what we're saying. We're going to plant these extra 25 trees over here. They're going to be evergreens. And I just wanted to say they're going to be replacement trees.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
I think that's fair too.
Okay, but we're not going to get less sticks in the ground. Okay,
no.
Kevin, it sounds great. I think both you and us are trying to make it a beautiful development.
I agree. You guys are working tremendously hard. I have no doubt.
Okay, and I think that's fair. That way we can pass it tonight.
Yes.
And everybody's happy.
I hope.
And we get enough more trees, but not that many more trees, but we get a few more trees that block the views we need to block.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
Yes.
I'm with you.
All right. So
amen.
Chase, if those were your magic fingers, thank you. Can commission refer to the screen here, condition number 6 specifically, and then reference number 3, which was changed earlier this evening? I'll give you a moment to look that over. Is there any more discussion that needs to take place before we continue on this evening? Seeing none, I will entertain first motion number 1 to approve the final development plan with 6 conditions.
So move.
Second.
Thank you. I have a first and a second. Ms. Beal?
Mr. Supalack, Mr. Grimes,
Yes.
Ms. Call,
Yes.
Mr. Schneer,
Yes.
Ms. Kennedy,
Yes.
Ms. Fox, Mr. Fishman.
Yes.
Thank you. Looking for a motion for recommend approval to City Council for a final plat. Before we actually look at the motion, we do have one condition. Can someone present that on the screen so that we can refer to that?
It's at the top of this slide, just to make
Thank you.
for technical adjustments.
All right. I will entertain a motion.
So move.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. I have a first and a second. Ms. Beal?
Mr. Fishman,
Yes.
Ms. Fox, Ms. Kennedy,
Yes.
Mr. Schneer,
Yes.
Mr. Grimes,
Yes.
Ms. Call,
Yes.
Mr. Supalack.
Yes.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, talk about collaboration.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for coming forward tonight. Thank you for working with us. Thank you for your understanding. We are looking forward to seeing this new project come in and come to fruition and get, you know, ground movement here soon. I do want to round out, because we did discuss trees for quite a lengthy time, and you know, Dublin, we love our trees. But I do want to highlight the amenities that this particular application, that this particular project incorporates. And I can't say anything else other than stunning. The amenities are stunning. If you look at the gathering place, you know, Ms. Fox constantly talks about places to gather, places to congregate, places you want to enjoy time outside with your friends and neighbors, hopefully closer than 6 feet someday. But hopefully. It is a beautiful project. So thank you very much. And we look forward to seeing you again.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. I agree.
I think this was a great example of give and take. And I think it'll turn out to be a beautiful development. I think it'll be an example for other developments. So I'm proud to have worked with you.
Romanelli Vince will be happy, and Jim and all those guys for this comment. I think it's going to be great as well. Thank you very much.
I'll, shamefully take some of that too, because I was happy to be a part of this. It was fun to design. So we're glad that it worked out, and I'm looking forward to seeing it built so I can get pictures of it and put it on my website.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you. Thanks, guys.
Have a wonderful rest of your evening. Thank you for spending some time with us this evening.
All righty. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. All right, ladies and gentlemen, finish line. I see the light. I'm just hoping it's not a train. Mobility update presentation. This evening, we have a presentation on the Dublin Mobility Study, a multi-phase strategic plan to support the community's evolving mobility needs. So, Mr. Rayburn, did I get that right?
Yes.
I have JM. I just had minor panic attack. Mr.
No, you're fine.
Welcome.
Can everyone see my screen?
Yes, sir.
Well, good evening, members of the commission. I see some familiar faces, but I also see a lot of new faces. My name is J.M. Rayburn. I am a city planner with the planning division, and I've been working mostly on mobility the past year and a half. We have some exciting updates that we want to share with you, and this was at the request of the Public Services Committee on Council, which Councilmember Fox also serves on. We think this would be a great opportunity to share the updates, but also provide some guidance on how you can look at these development applications through a mobility lens. I did hear a lot of mobility chatter in previous cases this evening, so I am encouraged by that. But without further ado, let's dig in. The outline, I will try and be as concise as possible. I know we've been here for a long time. I promise I will not talk about trees, so rest assured this should be a good, informative presentation. I will talk about the 5 areas of focus with mobility, and then again, talk about how we can look at these through a mobility lens where applicable. I'm going to take a pause briefly after 5 of the areas, so you can ask me questions then, or we can save it to the end for discussion. So I'll start off with explaining the Dublin Mobility Study. This was started a few years back as a way to plan for innovative transportation improvements to support the needs of the community. And that could be along the workforce, or it can be for those aging in place or those with disabilities. We started this back in 2017, and we commenced this initiative with a fairly large public workshop, which some of you may have been at in attendance. We were able to acquire a lot of great public input, which led us to do the visioning and key objectives of the phase 1 of the study. Phase 2 is taking that information and fine-tuning where we want to focus our priorities, as well as making sure that it complemented the connected community theme by City Council. Phase 3 was mostly about taking that information, crafting pilots, and launching them. We were able to get a lot of great information from that, as well as secure some grant and funding opportunities. We're currently in phase 4, but we're sunsetting this phase. We were able to take a few of our pilots into permanent mobility programs and looking at the long-term funding. And phase 5 is still being crafted, but it's going to take a deeper dive in some areas of focus. So I want to run by the key objectives with everybody. First and foremost is to support economic development, which is very important to the City of Dublin. On top of that, we want to promote equitable access to mobility, which is important even more now so than ever, as well as expanding multimodal options. So we feel like if we get people more active in transportation options, as well as maybe not driving everywhere, we can improve public health, whether it be through cleaner air or just more activity for the community. The last one says preserve our environs by focusing on future growth. That is speaking to acknowledging the character of Dublin and the existing neighborhoods, but where there's opportunity to redevelop, we can think about developments that are maybe more walkable or transit friendly, or developments that can position the city to be more competitive in the future in terms of luring the workforce of tomorrow. So this is the exciting part, the 5 areas of focus. We start off with microtransit, and forgive me, let me say this, that a lot of this is jargon in the industry, but I will break it down as best I can for everybody here. So microtransit is really speaking about shuttles and circulators that provide shorter trips than fixed line coded service, and may actually augment some of that service that comes to our community to make sure that people are getting to their final destinations. We're looking at shared micromobility, which again is another catch-all term for bike share and scooters for rent. We're looking at concepts for mobility hubs, which is very important in all of this. We're looking at wayfinding opportunities in a new way that hasn't been done by other communities in Central Ohio. And then looking at complete smart streets, and that's speaking to having the infrastructure in the streets that are accessible by everyone, regardless of their age and ability. And then looking at smart streets would be, what are some of the smart components that we could do to either enhance safety or perhaps gather data that's very important for decision making. So I put together this visual to give you an idea. I'm a very visual person. I'm sure other people are as well in the commission, to show you how this all connects to each other. Mobility hubs play an essential role as we look forward to connecting all of these together and leveraging all the different modes of transportation. So I'm going to dive into the Dublin Connector, which is our microtransit. And this, again, is speaking to providing mobility independence for those that are aging in place and for those with disabilities, as well as providing the first and last mile connection for the workforce. So something that's interesting to note is when we're talking to regular riders and workers in Dublin who take the bus from Central Ohio, different places in Central Ohio to Dublin, they would take the bus to bus stops around in Dublin, but we found that they would have to take Uber and Lyft to complete their trips. This is what I'm talking about, the last and first mile connections. And we found that some of the workforce in Dublin was paying $200 to $400 a month just in Uber and Lyft transportation. And more often than not, these workers were either low skilled or low wage, which definitely amplifies the burden on our workforce that commutes by bus and has to make these extra connections. I do want to touch on what we did during the COVID pandemic and what we continue to do. We do have 2 lines of service. I mentioned those aging in place and those with disabilities, and we also have the workforce side of the microtransit service. We had to discontinue the senior disabled service back in March when the shelter in place order was enacted by the governor. And that was largely in part to mitigate the exposure of COVID to our most vulnerable citizens in our community. We worked with our regional partners and Dublin partners in the community, and we created a delivery service that was eligible to use with our federal funds. This service provided food and essential goods to our seniors in the community, and we organized different schedules of deliveries based on the need in the community. So it was a great success story and something to be very proud of, that the city was able to provide this kind of service. I want to talk about key performance indicators. We do track a lot of data with microtransit, and that's important as we think about opportunities to improve the service and save money and increase efficiency. I do think it's worth noting that we're able to divert over 10,000 miles of those traveling by themselves in their vehicles, and they are able to use the service instead, which means less congestion on Dublin roadways. We have just under 200 unique riders at the time using the service, connecting them to 110 destinations and employers in Dublin. Through this service, we've been able to provide, or I should say, divert over 8,000 pounds of carbon emissions from the community, which means cleaner air for everybody in the community. And we're coming on almost 8,000, but I'll say 7,700 rides that we've provided thus far since we launched in 2018. I think it's worth noting that we are tracking parking spaces that are freed up daily. I know parking is a very sensitive issue in many communities, and Dublin's not excluded. And so we're thinking about how this transit can not only provide better service, but also open up other opportunities in terms of parking and the demand for that in our community. So here we have a heat map of where the top destinations are for those that are using the microtransit shuttles. AC Marriott and Walmart are tied in first, and that speaks to the AC Marriott's dependence on this service for their support staff and their janitorial staff. And then Walmart speaks to those who are needing just basic goods and retail. As you begin to look at this, we do have 3 clusters that we see emerging in terms of destinations for the city. One cluster is around historic Dublin, as well as Bridge Park in the Sawmill Road corridor. Another cluster is around Tuttle Mall, which is an important retail destination, but also transfer site or transfer point for those using the CODA bus service to our community. And then Avery Square, with a lot of retail amenities, is another cluster of destinations. I do want to bring the commission aware that there are regional efforts underway. One in particular is the Link Us initiative, which is done by the City of Columbus with support from the Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission and CODA. This is looking at the Northwest Corridor, which would start around Broad Street downtown and meander up the Olentangy River corridor to about Bethel Road. It'll go westward and then connect to Dublin. So while we are in the purview of the corridor, a lot of the focus is going from downtown to Bethel Road. So this gives us an opportunity to work with our regional partners and figure out what the best way forward is for Dublin in terms of land use changes and zoning changes, as well as opportunities to invest in technology and improvements to pedestrian and bicycle facilities. So I'm going to talk about next steps, and this is to give you an idea of where we're heading with microtransit. The first 2 items have asterisks, and that's to indicate that we are making a lot of progress on these 2 points, if not almost done with them. The first is to consider utilizing a city vehicle to maximize branding opportunities and lower operating costs. So we see about a 36% cost savings if we use one of our city vehicles for share to operate this service. Another thing is, as I just mentioned, is coordinating with our regional partners on the Northwest Corridor, because there are a lot of opportunities to better connect Dublin with downtown and vice versa. The rest of them speak to advocating for CODA service, as well as finding ways to continue the longevity of this program through funding sources. It's worth noting that progressive parking and demand management policies will be needed at some point, which will probably have some overlap with the purview of this commission. We will continue to look at the KPIs, and hopefully, while this service is a pre-scheduled service, meaning you have to schedule about 12 hours ahead of time, we hope to eventually get to a point where it can be on demand, but we'll see how things go. So this is where it brings me to the mobility lens for the commission, particularly with microtransit. I want the commission to think about 3 different areas. The first is that every trip begins and ends on foot as a pedestrian. And it's really important to think about the experience, which was noted many times throughout the night, of the experience that you have when you are in our community and the ease of getting around as a pedestrian or someone on foot. I think it's worth noting how a building is oriented on a site. You have to ask yourself, is the building oriented to the street or is it oriented to a parking lot? And what does that mean for the experience for those that are not driving to this location or this development? The last point is actually one of my favorite books. So I have it right here. It's called Made for Walking by Julie Campoli. And I put the cover here in the author. So she speaks a lot about the 5 Ds and P. So I can't take credit for that. That's all Julie. But what she's saying is we have to look at diversity of uses in particular when we think about creating a walkable environment. We have to think about density, and that's not just people, but the density of housing and how that relates to the environment. We have to think about the distance to transit. So how far do I have to walk to go to a bus stop or a park and ride? Based on the data, we know about 1/4 mile is a good distance for people that they're willing to walk. I have to say, with the parking, the parking challenges in historic Dublin, it seems like people are more willing to walk maybe 1/8 of a mile rather than 1/4 mile when it comes to parking and getting to their destinations. So there may be a little bit of changing of how people react in the suburbs, but there's more data and we'll have to see how that plays out. Another thing is to think about the design, in particular the streetscape. So that was brought up tonight, thinking about what is the streetscape, what is the experience, not only aesthetically, but also how you experience that if you're a pedestrian or someone on a bicycle. And someone who also wants to use transit. So I have to say that if you are looking to go to a transit stop or a bus stop, if your experience to that, if your trip to that bus stop is not very satisfying or you feel it's not safe, then that's going to mitigate your chances of actually using the service. We really need to think about the full picture here and the experience that we're creating. The next part is talking about destination accessibility. So how easy is it to walk, for example, from historic Dublin to Bridge Park and vice versa? That pedestrian bridge creates a lot of opportunities for people to get back and forth easily and safely. So things like that to think about when you're looking at development applications and looking at the context of those, which I'm sure this commission does with case by case. The last part is the P in the equation, and that is parking. And parking has a very considerable impact on travel behavior. So for example, if parking is free, that's fine, but you're probably not going to dissuade anyone from taking another alternative transportation if it's easy and free to park. So that's what that's really getting to. And it's about finding the right balance in each community and what the community wishes. So again, I hope you take a look at this book and make note of it. It does have a Short North example on the cover, which is kind of cool, but there are examples from around the country of how you can do density in a way that's very sensitive to urban form and surrounding context of buildings. One last thing on microtransit, I wanted to have a conversation about the street grid, particularly in Bridge Park. The street grid is really important because when you make those extra connections, you can have the opportunity to shorten that distance by foot or on bicycle, rather than having these super blocks where you have to walk a great distance to either go right or left or navigate. So as we continue to see Bridge Park and the Bridge Street district mature, and we see opportunities to connect the street grid in a more meaningful way for pedestrians, I think you should think of that and not lose sight of that as you review these development applications. So I'm going to stop here. Are there any questions on the microtransit piece before I move on to shared micromobility?
Looking to the commissioner, any questions?
I have one.
Yes.
Hey, JM, thanks so much for being with us tonight. I know everyone's tired and it's late, but this is such an interesting topic, so much more than trees for me. Curious about the micro transit. Is this a pay-to-play service or is this a service offered by the city, like you said, to promote economic development in other areas?
Great question. So this service is provided at no charge to riders, whether it be workforce or those aging in place. And that is a lot to the credit of City Council and also our ability to go for grants at the federal and state level to help make that happen.
Thank you. And then what is the long-term plan for the microtransit? I mean, if you're going to talk about the potential to reduce need for parking spaces, and if that should be a consideration for this council, what do you see as the long-term play for this as far as sustainability?
That's a great question. We actually had a meeting with CODA last week about lessons learned during the pandemic with on-demand mobility and microtransit. And the consensus was from CODA and the City of Dublin that microtransit isn't going away. It's just going to have to play a different or bigger role in our ecosystem of mobility in Dublin. So there's always going to be an opportunity that until we get better CODA service or other ways of getting around town without driving yourself, microtransit could be a great option in a suite of solutions for mobility.
Understood. Thank you.
Any other questions from the commission?
Just real quick, JM, can you just describe exactly what a mobility hub is? Because I don't think most people know.
Yes, and we're going to get to that later in the presentation. Okay. So it builds off of each other, if you don't mind waiting a little bit.
I'll wait.
Okay. Thank you for your patience this evening. All right, we'll continue on. So Jane, after this, we'll get to mobility hubs, but first we're going to talk about bike share. So bike share is a very exciting area for Dublin. When we had that fairly large workshop in 2017, a bike share was one of the most demanded improvements to the mobility system by residents at that time. So we started to look at opportunities to have that happen in Dublin. We've been approached by Trip Bikes. They are based in Columbus, but they feature a dockless e-bike or electric bike that has pedal assist and also a thumb throttle. So these bikes, they're very cool to ride. I have to say I've ridden them a few times and I love them, but I would encourage other people to ride them for their, see how they feel about it. But needless to say, we're working on a public-private partnership with this company. We hope to launch possibly this year, if not next year. So that's something to keep an eye on, and we'll continue to update you as needed. The other opportunity we're looking at is Kogo Bike Share, and this is a system that is in Columbus, but has expanded to other communities, including Bexley, Upper Arlington, and Grandview Heights. A couple years ago, there was an OSU studio that was able to secure state and federal funding in order to pay about like a majority of the bike share, it was about 80%. So we're using that same game plan, and we're partnering with Upper Arlington, Columbus, Hilliard in the Metro Park system in order to do a joint application for federal and state funding. So that's a little bit of a long process. We have gotten an extra, I guess, a heavy lift from Ohio State. There's currently a studio right now that's focused just on this expansion into our communities. So they're going to provide suggested locations for station locations, as well as funding opportunities. And how they do that is going to be a public input program. So we're very thankful for the help from Ohio State in order for them to do the outreach on our behalf and do a great report that we can then submit for a grant from all of us. So the timeline may be a couple years from now, but we're well underway with that process. And we think it's worth it if it's if we're able to get 80% of the system paid for. I have to admit that we also been approached by Bird Scooters back in late November of 2020. We are preparing a memo to council to give an update on how that meeting went. It was very encouraging, and they would like to launch in Dublin, probably because all the other urban areas have been accounted for, and the next frontier would be suburbs like Dublin that are doing interesting things, that have density going, and we're very progressive in nature. So we will continue those conversations. It is worth noting that our code currently does not allow Bird Scooters on shared use paths. So we have to go to council to ask for them to either alleviate areas of town from that code requirement, or eventually adjust the code in order to allow other micromobility options to be operating in Dublin. So it's a bit of a technicality that we have to work through, but I'm sure we'll get through it successfully. Something that I want to bring to your attention in terms of a mobility lens for bike share and for scooters and just people who bike in general, I think you could begin to think about how this can be incorporated in Dublin. That could be a site design that incorporates bike parking, or a drop-off area for scooters or other micromobility options. Informal reviews could be a great opportunity for this commission to encourage applicants to think about on-site bike storage spaces that include on-site locker rooms and showers for those who do commute by bike or other means of active transportation. And it could be an opportunity to have the conversation is, as we have KOGO on the way and we expect to be successful in that initiative, would there be any interest from these applicants from possibly being part of a station location near them? So these are questions that the commission can begin to explore or encourage with applicants where applicable. But before I get to mobility hubs, are there any questions on bike shares, scooters, and some of these other considerations? Yes.
I have a question for you, JM. At a very high level, you don't have to go into the weeds necessarily, but I remember the experiment we ran with Lime bikes several years ago, and they were scattered all over Dublin. And were there some high level lessons learned from that exercise that is being applied with these new partnerships?
It's a great question. And there are lessons learned. Thankfully, through that pilot, we were able to obtain a lot of data on ridership. So we have a heat map to understand where the community was going during that pilot. But we also learned what it was like to work with a company that's, say, based out of California versus based out of Columbus. So we're encouraged by the fact that companies like Trip are based here because they understand our community and they want to be part of it. So one of the lessons learned is while some of these California companies can provide service at little to no cost to the community, they have a tendency to leave just as quickly as they came. So we're really looking for someone who's invested in our community, and that could be infrastructure associated with KOGO, or it can be other ways to find companies like Trip to come to our community. And they do have technology that's worth noting that can help create a geofence or focus where bikes and scooters can operate. So I think that lends itself some possibilities for curb management and having not a scattering of bikes everywhere.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
No problem. Any other questions before we move on?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Christina said that the Lime bikes were actually, they pulled out of Dublin. They weren't. They left us. We didn't leave them. But it was a huge problem. Bikes were everywhere. And I spent some time in Denmark. And in Denmark, they have a thing that's just like a Lime bike, except you have to put over there, it's a euro. You have to put a euro in the bike to take it. And they're racked. They're not just sitting around. They have little racks everywhere. And you put the euro in and you ride the bike. And the only way you get your euro back is you put it back in a rack and the euro pops out. Okay. And that solved that problem. And when I was in Denmark, we used them. I've been in Denmark several times, and we use those bikes all the time, and lots of people do. Is that an idea that sounds like something we can explore?
It sounds like an interesting idea. When I was thinking about it, it sounds like it's a great way to. It sounds like that system's fully subsidized if they're able to put the euro in and create an incentive that you get it back. So it could be worth looking at, but I'm not sure what the appetite would be for us. If we were to work with KOGO, the operator would be the one who calls the shots in terms of the cost and also the possibility to ride. So in that sense, we wouldn't have to worry about it. With Trip bikes, they have a program where you pay, like you said, you pay like $1 to unlock the bike, and they'll give you a part of that payment back if you put it in an area that the city designates if it wants it to be. So it's kind of a carrot incentive, like you were saying. I think there's possibility, maybe not doing a full subsidy, but partial subsidy to encourage that behavior.
And in Switzerland, they have two different programs. They have the one that is you have to use a credit card, and that's mostly designed for tourists. And then they have another one that is like your bus card. And you put money on the bus card. Some of it's subsidized based on your income limit, some of it isn't. And that's the way you manage it. You swipe a card and you take it. And if you're a tourist, most likely it's a credit card. And if you're not, then it's your bus pass.
Great. I love that system. There may be opportunities for that with the Pivot app that was launched by Smart Columbus. And the Pivot app is meant to be a common payment platform from different operators of transit in our region. So that can be an opportunity down the road that we could look into. I know that KOGO also provides a discounted pass based on income levels. So that's another equity lens that's included in this.
Yeah, when I brought that up, I wasn't bringing it up for an economic reasons. I was bringing it up because it gets the bike put back where it's supposed to go.
Right. So it's a great, I think the carrot, the carrot, so to speak, approach could lend itself to a lot of great outcomes in that respect.
JM, one of the things that I keep hearing from at least the other commission members, which is I think it's going to be a problem unless we figure this out, is where to return these bikes and whether or not we have enough stations, enough bike racks, because in Dublin, unlike downtown, people just don't like to see bikes laying on the sidewalk or stranded somewhere. We don't even let you keep your trash can out more than a day, so we're not going to lay your bike there. So, I mean, is the plan to really have numerous places for these bikes to be parked in? Can you take the bike all over the city, not just in a small area like the historic district or Bridge Park?
Right. That's a great question. It's something that we'd have to work out through KOGO. But I think there's opportunity for, at least for the KOGO side, we don't want to restrict access because we want to be part of the regional system. So I think there's opportunity there to succeed in that respect.
Yeah, I think it is important that everybody gets to use it wherever they want to. Right.
Absolutely. And there'll be opportunity with mobility hubs, which I'll segue right into right now. So mobility hubs are exciting to talk about. And they're excited to talk about because they serve as an opportunity to co-locate many different modes of transportation, so many different ways to get around town at one point. And they serve as transfer points. So for example, with this graphic, you could have a bus station that also has a KOGO bike dock for bike share, and then you also have the scooter share. So this is an example of how Minneapolis is doing mobility hubs. And there's other cities that we're looking at for guidance. When you think about mobility hubs in Dublin, we're separating them into 3 tiers. And the tiers get to the intensity of connections that you have at each mobility hub. So for example, a tier 1 mobility hub would be one in Bridge Park, perhaps, or historic Dublin, or the Park and Ride with CODA. We want to pack as many opportunities and options at these mobility hubs to get around town as possible. So that can include the Dublin Connector, include the bike share, include other things I'm going to get to. But the point is, we're thinking about how to connect all these mobility modes together. The second area is looking at areas like the Dublin Community Rec Center, the hospital, OSU ambulatory care that's being built, or even OU's new branch campus. Makes sense to have a campus kind of level mobility hub at some of these developments. And then finally is the neighborhood level. That will probably be less intense, but it will still be intended to connect neighborhoods together with the rest of the system. So here are some examples from around North America. Minneapolis, I mentioned before, we really like what they're doing. We're studying it. Columbus, this is the Linden Library. The library, I think, is great because it's one of the natural areas of congregation for a community. And there's programming that happens there. So it makes sense to have a KOGO station at a library. And here they have parking not for just KOGO, but also looks like bird scooters. So this is an example of how a mobility hub can accommodate different modes. And then Montreal is another area that we're looking at. So the next steps for us, we're looking at doing a design for one mobility hub from each of the tiers. And we're continuing to look for those opportunities as they arise with our partners, particularly with CODA and other areas of transfer that may be in Dublin or just outside Dublin, and how we can work with our partners. So for the purposes of looking at this as through a mobility lens for the commission, I think there's opportunity to encourage applicants to consider a variety of mobility connections, particularly when they come for informal reviews. This is part of the feedback that you can challenge them or encourage them to consider in their final designs. I do think there would be the most opportunity for those campus community center hubs as well as neighborhood hubs from the commission as they get these development applications. Does anyone have any questions on mobility hubs? All right.
Jam, I just wanted to, yeah, I do. If we're to ask them that, who would pay for the hub? I mean, if we could get a development and planning could work with the development, let's say we were on the early stages of OSU's ambulatory care and we say, we really want to have a mobility hub there. Who would actually pay for the building of the hub? Would that be something we'd have grant money for? We just need a location and the developer to say, yeah, you could put it on our parcel.
It's a good conversation to have. Perhaps with developments that aren't built yet, you can have the opportunity to see if they can incorporate that into the design and costs of their development. Where there's already developments happening, the city could think about a grant program. So when I say that, this hasn't been vetted yet, but it's an idea that we're floating around, that we have a Beautify Your Neighborhood grant for HOAs and condo associations. Perhaps we can think about one that's centered around mobility. So we could work with HOAs to build some sort of improvement to mobility, whether it be a bike repair station or some sort of neighborhood level mobility hub. And that needs more conversations, but I think it's an interesting option to look at.
Okay.
Don't you feel that most of these will be used by out-of-town people, not local people? I mean, local people, you already have a bicycle or a vehicle to get around. So a lot. I don't know if the library would be the best hub, because I don't know if an out-of-towner is going to go to the library. He's maybe to and from restaurants and hotels and so on. And so, does anybody have a number on that? How many local residents use a one of those bikes or scooters or whatever?
That's a great question. We have data from Kogo that during the pandemic, they've seen almost 30% higher ridership throughout their system, particularly when CODA service was limited or discontinued temporarily. In terms of residents using it, the Dublin connector has been used widely by a lot of those people who are aging in place, and those with disabilities. So those would be the ones that are using it within the city. And we do provide some connections to Sawmill Road, which is on the border of the city, as well as Tuttle. So I think you'll find that there'll be a mix of different people, whether it be residents or workforce or visitors who would use these mobility hubs depending on the trip and their destination.
JM, just one clarification. You said that CODA saw an increase in ridership during the pandemic. Is that
Kogo did?
Oh, is that per route?
That was system wide. So they saw, don't quote me on this, but this is generally, they were averaging about 4,000 rides per month before the pandemic, and then they were over 5,000 per month during the pandemic.
Oh, geez. That's contrary to what you'd think. I mean, I don't know that I'd want to sit on a bus during the pandemic with.
No, this is Kogo, correct?
Yes, Kogo. So these are the bike share bicycle.
Oh, bike shares, not a bus. Okay, I thought you said.
Correct. Yeah, after the shelter in place, a lot of CODA service was drastically limited or discontinued. So it made sense for Kogo to see a bump in ridership because of that, because people still needed to get around, but wanted to do it outside in a kind of a more comfortable setting.
Right,
and like
right.
you said, right, being on a bus, right.
Okay.
So we'll go on to wayfinding. Wayfinding, I'm sure this group is very well aware with this concept, but it's the visual cues that you have to orient yourself in a community, but also to figure out your destination and how to get there. Wayfinding is a great opportunity to highlight local points of interest as well. And for those visitors, give an opportunity to see Dublin and explore a little bit of the community. So on my screen, I'm going to orient yourself. This is a view of the Dublin area. We have the Olentangy Trail in red on the right of the screen. The Scioto Trail is taking shape in the middle of the screen, north-south. The dots that you see are trails that have been planned but not implemented yet. So they haven't been built, but it is intended to continue building out these trails. The green line in the center of the screen that starts at 161 in Sawmill and goes to Glacier Ridge, that's an exciting opportunity for the city because the Central Ohio Greenways Board voted to designate that as a regional trail of significance last February. So this opens up opportunities for us to think about wayfinding and using this trail and branching out from it to highlight different parts of the community. It's also worth noting that we need to find a Dublin name for this trail. So feel free to think on that and get back to me. I don't know what we're thinking, but since it only goes to Dublin, we have an opportunity to really make it a Dublin name trail. So feel free to email me with those thoughts. But I want to demonstrate how we're looking at wayfinding through what we're calling bike loops. And bike loops were a concept that MORPC asked us to take on as we had this new trail designated in our community. So here we have red dots that are schools. You see that the areas shaded in green are the green spaces and parks. And then I'm going to highlight our first bike loop, which is a recreation-focused bike loop, about 8 miles altogether, and it's about 40 minutes as a leisurely ride. It starts and ends more or less at the Dublin Community Rec Center, but you can of course pick this up if you're on the regional trail of significance or at one of the schools or parks along the way. So I want to then add where we're looking at for proposed mobility hubs. And this will be informed by what the OSU students do with the bike share study that they're doing for us now, but also be based on input and conversations we're having with regional partners. So as you look at the first go ahead, these are the first 3 mobility hubs that we're looking to design, as I mentioned. We have the Dublin Community Rec Center, the Columbus Metropolitan Library Dublin branch at the parking garage, and then the Franz Road and Metro Place North, which is a great connector for the cluster of hotels and offices there that would then meander through historic Dublin, over the bridge, and then doing a loop around the cycle track in Bridge Park. So we're looking at that as another possible bike loop with an entertainment focus, but starting in any of Franz Road. So this is an idea of how this is all beginning to layer on top of each other and connect. I want to talk about the wayfinding on the bike loops. We're thinking about a vinyl sticker application, the purple one that you see on the left of the screen. These are great because they are very durable and they have an adhesive film on the back, and we also do an adhesive spray to make sure that they stay to the pavement, whether it be brick or asphalt. We did a few pilots, they held up brilliantly, so we look forward to expanding our sticker wayfinding program. What we're thinking is once we get a bike loop established and we put these markers down where appropriate, and we have people ride these bike loops and give us input, we'll do adjustments as needed based on rider feedback. But we want to transition to a long-term solution, which is using stencils and glow-in-the-dark paint as part of the wayfinding system that we have. Each bike loop can have its own iconography or symbols that can be associated with it. But we see this as an opportunity to do something that's very different than other communities in Central Ohio, not to mention the United States. And this could be an opportunity to prolong the utilization of these shared use paths beyond dusk, if you will. And so people can enjoy like a glow ride or something of the sort if you want to do some programming with it. For next steps, we're going to continue to work on different bike loops with themes. We want people to ride them and give us feedback so we can make them the best that they can be in an experience. We've had conversations with regional partners, in particular Visit Dublin, the Visitor and Dementia Bureau, and we came up with a list of how we can expand the bike loop program. We can do entertainment themed loops as well as historical and cultural loops based on our assessment a few years ago. Public art is a great opportunity for us to partner with the Dublin Arts Council. Neighborhood Fitness Challenge bike loops have been very popular during the pandemic, so we want to think about ways we can get more people active after the pandemic and for the remainder of it. We're thinking about holiday-like bike loops. I don't know if that has something to do with the holiday lights at the zoo, but I think it's great to think about. Visit Dublin want us to think about a shamrock-shaped bike loop. I don't know how I can do that, but I will figure it out as we look at our system. But the point is that we can make this Dublin oriented or Dublin specific while still allowing the greater connectivity and access to our system. They also recommended doing a Celtic cocktail bike loop and an Irish fair door bike loop. So as you can see, there's no limit to what we can do, and we would love feedback based on your perspective and your conversations with the community. Are there any questions on the bike loop that we're looking to do with wayfinding? All right, hearing none. The last thing I want to touch on is complete and smart streets. The big takeaway for this is that we're leaning on the Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission for a lot of the direction and policies with complete and smart streets. And we've responded when they've come out with new updates to their policies. So Dublin City Council passed a resolution for complete streets in June 2018. And then they passed a resolution in support of MORPC's smart streets policy in October 2019. And this was meant to give city departments an opportunity to think about how we can incorporate smart technology in our transportation and mobility system. Again, a long-term policy consideration that we will continue to push is a Vision Zero policy. We see other communities like Columbus taking this on. It's meant to look at street design as well as policies such as speed limits to think about how we can mitigate serious injury and death. We still have to do some internal meetings before we can really dive into this policy, but I think it's something aspirational that we should look at as a city. So again, this is the presentation. I'm really excited that you joined me for this time. The final takeaway I want to give everyone on the commission is that we are looking to build and expand the Dublin mobility ecosystem, and that will incorporate mobility hubs as well as microtransit, the fixed route transit from CODA, wayfinding and bike loops, complete and smart streets, and then shared micromobility. So this all will layer on with each other, they'll augment and leverage each other. But I want you to have the biggest takeaway of what we're trying to achieve, and then the power of the commission to encourage applicants when applicable to think about mobility in different ways. So I'm happy to answer any questions, any feedback. We do have a website where you can access information on the workshop that we had, as well as some of the reports from previous phases. So 1, 2, and 3 are posted on that website. And I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
JM, just a note of appreciation before we go into any questions and comments, and a request to send out, I don't trust myself at this hour to jot down a URL. So if you wouldn't mind sending out a note to the commission with this particular link. We look at all the individual applications, and we have to look through that lens of planning for the 20, 30, 50, 100 years in the future. And it's not very often that we get to see something that makes such an impact on the entire city in such a short amount of time. And so I'll just speak for me, but it is nice to see that planning and direct action items, that the city has more of a control and of those guardrails, and making sure that we're doing things properly on the planning side, but then feed into the execution side. So thank you very much for the presentation tonight and for joining with us. And with that, I'll turn time over to commission if you want to ask any questions or make any comments.
Just want to echo everything Rebecca said. JM, this was great, and I agree to see that some of this stuff, as it starts to get traction and come to fruition, obviously becomes magnetic with the parcels and projects that we can affect that will be around these things. So this is really nice to be tuned into. Thank you.
JM, I think, this is great information for us. I would encourage you, as you need suggestions as things are going forward, to come back to the commission and or update us frequently, even if there are things that are going on. Email the commission to let us know, because the more we know, the more we can help make recommendations to council, and the more we can incorporate your visions into developments that come along. I think sometimes in any government, you've got different segments, different departments, different commissions kind of working independently. And if we can keep the information flowing into the planning commission, maybe we can help move the wheel, I guess is what I'm saying.
Well played, Councilmember Fox. But yes, I
Yeah.
agree, loud and clear, point taken.
Because it's, if you read the Bridge Street Code, you know the intent, you can push and push and push. And one of the things that tonight that when I was talking about the Germain thing, I came across, you're going to love this, Fred Kent. He writes for Project for Public Spaces. And he says, if you plan for cars, you're going to get cars. And if you plan for people and places, you're going to get people and places. So we've got to keep planning and using what you're telling us about and the other areas that the city is working on to make sure that we incorporate it in the planning. Otherwise, we're going to get what we plan.
Absolutely. I think that's a great point. And what I would say to that is we are going to be launching a quarterly mobility newsletter. So I'll be sure to add everyone's email on this commission to get that, and maybe check your spam periodically. But it's our first step to getting more, to your point, getting people aware of what we're doing and on the same page.
Right. Thanks, Jan, so much.
Ms. Kennedy.
Thank you so much.
Jan, I'm thrilled that you're doing this because we know transportation is going to change. We just don't know how. And as long as we keep up with it, and I'm so happy that the city's doing this. If we keep up with it, we'll be in step and be able to attract the people we want to attract. So I'm thrilled.
I'll just ditto. Thank you so much, JM, for the presentation. I'm intrigued by it because I work in the auto industry, mobility industry, I should say. But this was really interesting, and I'm so happy to see that Dublin has this on the front of mind. This is great. So very much appreciated.
Mr. Schneier, Mr. Grimes, anything you'd like to add?
Thank you. It was. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I just echo everyone, and I'm amazed how much I learned in such a short period of time of what's happening here, which is awesome.
I would say that the big picture is always bigger than any one of us think, and to have more input always makes for better decisions. So thank you, JM, very much for your presentation.
Great. Well, thank you, Commission, for indulging me this late. I do appreciate it.
Thank you, JM, and you have a good evening. Thank you for sacrificing your evening to be with us this evening. With that, looking to both staff and commission, do we have any communications this evening?
I don't have anything.
Has our appointment to meet? You should have something in your email recently.
I know it's probably too late to joke, but we don't need a master sign agreement for that wayfinding on those paths, do we? It is too late for a joke. I'm sorry.
We needed that, Leo.
Okay, my closing communication was good night. So
I went through two Diet Cokes to keep myself awake. Everyone, thank you for another successful Thursday. Good job to everybody. So thank you, staff, for spending a late night with us, and everyone have a great weekend.
You too.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.